You won't last a week. The old biker's voice was flat, final, like a judge reading a sentence. Madison Blake looked at the rusted gates, the mountains of crushed metal stretching as far as she could see, and the dozen hard-eyed men standing behind him like a wall built from bad decisions and worse years. She had lost everything. Her marriage, her business, her name. This was the only door still open. So she looked Victor Kane straight in the eye and said the words that would change both their lives forever. I don't need a week, I only need one chance. If this story already has your heart beating faster, hit that subscribe button right now and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning Madison Blake drove into Iron Ridge, the sun was already brutal. Not the kind of heat that made people slow down. The kind that made people mean. The kind that dried out patience and cracked good intentions the way it cracked the desert floor running alongside the highway. She had been driving for 11 hours straight. Her old pickup truck, a '98 Ford F-150 with a cracked passenger mirror and a heater that only worked when it wanted to, was carrying everything she still owned. 2 suitcases, a cardboard box full of files from her old life, a paper bag with a half-eaten sandwich she'd bought somewhere in New Mexico, and 3 bottles of water that were already warm, and 1 folded piece of paper she'd been reading and rereading for 3 days. Iron Ridge Salvage Yard. Records manager needed. Immediate start. Inquire at the gate. That was it. No phone number, no email, no name. Just an address handwritten in blue ink on a torn-off piece of notebook paper given to her by an old woman at a diner outside Flagstaff who said she overheard Madison asking the waitress if anyone in the area was hiring. You want honest work? The old woman had said, sliding the paper across the table without being asked. Go there. They pay on time. Cash. No questions. Madison had stared at the paper. What kind of place is it? The old woman picked up her coffee cup. The kind that's still standing when everything else falls down. She didn't say anything else. Madison had almost thrown the paper away twice. The first time was when she looked up the address and found out the Scrapyard was owned and operated by a Hells Angels chapter, Iron Ridge MC, established 1987, currently operating as a licensed automotive salvage and recycling facility under the legal name Kane Industrial Works, LLC. The second time was when she searched the town itself and found a 3-year-old forum post from someone who used to live there, which said exactly 4 things she remembered. Population 2,300, 1 gas station, 1 diner, and a salvage yard everyone pretends doesn't exist. But Madison didn't throw the paper away because she had nowhere else to go. She had spent the last 14 months trying to pretend that wasn't true. 14 months since the divorce was finalized, and Daniel walked out with half of everything they'd built, plus the house, because his name was on the deed and her name was on the debt. 14 months since she found out that her business partner, Derek Whitmore, had been quietly redirecting client contracts behind her back, billing under his own LLC, using the contacts she'd spent years building, the goodwill she'd spent years earning, and the reputation she'd spent years protecting to feed a company that had her name on none of the paperwork and his name on all of the money. 14 months since the environmental compliance firm she'd co-founded, Blake and Whitmore Environmental Solutions, had been dissolved in a legal dispute she couldn't afford to fight because she'd already spent her savings trying to keep the business alive after Derek stopped answering her calls. She tried to start over in Columbus, sent out 47 resumes in 6 weeks, got 3 interviews, 0 callbacks. She'd moved to Cincinnati, worked a temp job for a property management company until the contract ended, applied for a permanent position, was told they'd decided to go in a different direction. She'd driven to Pittsburgh thinking a bigger city meant more opportunity, rented a room above a laundromat, applied for 14 jobs in 3 weeks, got 1 response, a rejection email with a typo in her name. She was 32 years old. She had a master's degree in environmental systems management, 8 years of experience in logistics, compliance, and regulatory documentation. And she was sleeping in her truck in a desert parking lot eating a warm sandwich, holding a handwritten note from a stranger about to walk into a scrapyard run by the Hells Angels. If there was a bottom to hit, she was pretty sure she was standing on it. The gates of Iron Ridge Salvage were exactly what she'd expected. Tall, heavy, chain link reinforced with welded steel plate. A hand-painted sign over the entrance that read Iron Ridge Salvage, Authorized personnel only in faded black letters. Below it, someone had added in red spray paint, "We know if you belong here." She sat in her truck for 4 minutes before she got out. Not because she was afraid, because she was making herself breathe. She had learned that trick in therapy 2 years before the divorce, back when she still thought therapy would fix the right things. Count your breaths before you walk into a room that matters. It slows your heart rate. It keeps your voice steady. It makes you look like someone who belongs there, even when everything inside you is screaming that you don't. 4 breaths. She counted them. Then she got out of the truck, smoothed the front of her dark jeans, and walked to the gate. A man was sitting on an overturned oil drum beside the entrance. He looked like he'd been sitting there since the Carter administration. 50-something wide as a refrigerator, with forearms covered in tattoos so old and sun-faded, they'd blurred together into something that looked more like geography than artwork. He was reading a newspaper. He didn't look up when she walked over. "I'm here about the records manager position," Madison said. The man turned a page of his newspaper. "Gates locked," he said, not rudely, just as a statement of fact, the way someone might say sky's blue or water's wet. "I can see that," Madison said. "Is there someone I can talk to about, you got an appointment?" "No." "You know somebody here?" "No." He finally looked up at her. He had pale gray eyes that reminded her of concrete and an expression that wasn't hostile, just deeply professionally unbothered. He looked at her truck, looked at her face, looked at the piece of paper she was holding. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, nodding at the note. "A woman at a diner outside Flagstaff gave it to me." Something shifted in his face. Not much, but something. "Old woman, white hair, drives a green Buick. She was sitting in a booth. I didn't see her car." He looked at the paper again, then he folded his newspaper, stood up, and standing. He was enormous, at least 6'4", maybe 260, and pulled a phone from his vest pocket. He dialed a number without looking at it. Waited. "Yeah," he said into the phone. "Got a woman at the gate. Says Rita sent her." A pause. "Records thing." Another pause longer. "Yeah, she's here right now." He glanced at Madison. Blonde, about 30, looks like she drove a long way. A final pause. "Yeah, all right." He hung up, pulled a key from the same pocket, unlocked the gate. "Victor'll see you," he said. "Follow the main road and turn left at the crusher. Office trailers at the back. Don't touch anything, don't wander, and don't talk to anybody unless they talk to you first." Madison nodded. "Thank you," she said. He sat back down on the oil drum and picked up his newspaper. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Tiens." She would think about that later, about the weight in those words, about the way he said it, not as a warning exactly, but more like someone watching a person walk toward the edge of something steep and calculating out of basic human courtesy, whether it was worth mentioning. She didn't think about it then, though. Then she was just walking. The scrapyard was enormous, larger than she'd expected from the road. It stretched in every direction, towers of crushed cars stacked 4 and 5 high mountains of stripped metal sorted by material rows of partially dismantled vehicles. Industrial equipment, she couldn't name pieces of machinery, so large they seemed to have been dropped there from some other world. Everything was organized in the way that only made sense to people who worked there, chaotic on the surface with hidden logic underneath. There were men working everywhere, a dozen at least, maybe more. Welding, lifting, moving things with forklifts and cranes. They noticed her without making it obvious. The way people in a close-knit place always notice something that doesn't belong. Not with staring, just with that slight adjustment of body language, that half-second pause in motion that tells you that you have been logged and categorized and filed away for later discussion. She kept walking, turned left at the crusher, an enormous hydraulic machine that was currently idle, its jaws open, and followed the road to the back of the yard. The office trailer was exactly that, a double-wide mobile unit parked on concrete blocks with a set of wooden stairs leading up to a metal door. Next to the stairs, a large man was leaning against the railing, arms crossed, watching her walk toward him. This was Victor Kane. She knew it before anyone told her, the way you sometimes know things about people before a single word is exchanged. He was 60 years old, she would learn later, but he held himself like someone who had stopped counting birthdays a long time ago, because numbers like that had stopped meaning anything to him. He was tall, not quite as tall as the man at the gate, but solid in the way that old buildings are solid, not because of what they're built from, but because of how long they'd been standing. Gray hair pulled back, a beard that had gone completely white, eyes so dark they were almost black, a leather vest with patches she didn't try to read. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't warm either. He was simply watching her with the kind of attention that made you want to either stand up straighter or leave. She stood up straighter. "Madison Blake," she said when she reached the stairs. "Victor Kane," he said. He didn't offer his hand and she didn't reach for his. "You drove from Ohio." It wasn't a question. She realized the man at the gate must have seen her plates. "Yes, that's a long drive for a job listing that doesn't exist online. A woman in a diner gave me the note. I needed work. I came." He looked at her for a long moment. "You know who we are," he said. It was also not a question. "Hell's Angels," she said. "Iron Ridge chapter, legal business entity, automotive salvage and recycling. Licensed through the state, operating since 1987. Something moved across his face too fast to name, but she caught it. Surprise, maybe, or reassessment. "Most people who look us up either hang up the phone or send a very polite email saying they found another opportunity," he said. "I'm not most people," she said, "so I'm starting to think." He straightened up from the railing. "You know what this job is? Records management. Last 3 people who had it quit. First one lasted 7 months. Said the environment was too stressful. Second one lasted 4 months. Said she couldn't work with the staff. Third one," he paused. "Third one left after 2 weeks. Didn't say anything, just left." Madison waited. "You're not going to ask why?" "You'd tell me if you wanted me to know," she said. He studied her for another long moment. Then he turned and opened the door of the trailer. "Come in," he said. "I'll show you what's left." Ma'am, what was left was catastrophic. That was the only word for it. She had worked in compliance and records management for 8 years. She had seen bad systems. She had seen neglected filing structures. She had seen companies that ran entirely on handshake agreements and hoped nobody from the EPA ever showed up with a clipboard. She had never seen anything like this. The interior of the trailer had 2 rooms. The front room was a functioning office, 2 desks, a couple of computers, a whiteboard covered in what appeared to be inventory shorthand coffee machine calendar. Normal enough. The back room was a different universe. Filing cabinets that had been filled so far past capacity that the drawers could no longer close. Cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, some labeled, most not, a few with labels that said things like 2019 maybe, and old stuff, and one that simply said no. A folding table buried so deep in loose documents that the table's legs were no longer visible. Stacks of binders that had been pushed against the walls and then gradually slid sideways and fanned out across the floor. Loose papers everywhere, permits, invoices, inspection reports, photographs, handwritten notes, all of it mixed together in a layer that covered every surface. Victor stood in the war. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just let her look at it. After a long moment, she asked, "How old is the oldest document in here?" 1989, he said. "Maybe older. We stopped tracking when we stopped being able to find things." "When was your last state environmental inspection?" A pause. 14 months ago. "When's the next one scheduled?" "Could be any time. They stopped telling us in advance 2 inspections ago." She nodded slowly. She walked to the nearest box, opened it, pulled out a random document, read it for 30 seconds, put it back. "Operating permits," she asked. "In there somewhere." "Insurance documentation." Also in there. "Vehicle title records for salvage inventory." "There's a separate box somewhere." She turned around and looked at him. "You've been running this operation for 35 years, she said. "Correct. And at some point it grew faster than your paperwork could keep up with." "That's one way to say it." "And the people you hired to fix it either quit because they were overwhelmed, couldn't work with your crew, or, she paused. "What happened to the third one? The one who left after 2 weeks?" Victor's expression didn't change. "She started rearranging things without asking, made changes to systems people depended on, threw things away that shouldn't have been thrown away. The crew stopped cooperating with her, so she stopped being able to do her job, so she left." Madison filed that away carefully. "I won't change anything without asking first," she said. "I need to understand how things work here before I touch anything. The goal isn't to make this look like a corporate office, The goal is to make sure that if someone walks in here with a clipboard, they leave with nothing they can use against you. Victor looked at her steadily. That's the most sensible thing anyone said about this job in 4 years, he said. I've spent 8 years in environmental compliance, she said. I know what regulators look for. I know what they use to justify fines and shutdowns. And I know that most of the time when a company gets in trouble with regulators, it's not because they actually did something wrong. It's because they couldn't prove they didn't. The room was quiet. Victor walked to the small window above the buried folding table and looked out at the yard. You're hired, he said, conditional on the first week. If my crew can work with you and you can make something happen in that room, the job is yours, permanent. What are the hours? 7 to 4, Monday through Saturday. You'll use the second desk in the front room. There's a trailer at the back of the lot. It's been empty for 6 months. You can use it while you're here if you need a place to stay. She thought about the back seat of her truck. I'll take it, she said. Crew eats lunch together at noon in the main bay. First Friday of the month, everyone eats dinner together. You're not required to come, but the ones who don't come are the ones who don't last, she said. He looked at her. Yeah, I'll be there. He moved toward the front door of the trailer. You won't last a week, he said. Not cruelly, just plainly, like a weather report. Madison looked past him at the catastrophic back room at the mountain of 35 years of disorganized truth, at all the ways things could fall apart for these people if the wrong person found the wrong missing document on the wrong day. And she felt something she hadn't felt in 14 months, something that felt almost dangerous. She felt useful. I don't need a week, she said. I only need one chance. The first morning was the broom. She arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes early, and found Victor waiting outside the trailer with a cup of coffee he did not offer to share, and a broom he held out to her without ceremony. Start here, he said. She took the broom. She understood what it was, a test. The oldest test in any workplace with a hierarchy. Will she sweep without being told why? Will she do the lowest thing without complaint, without resentment, without the particular brand of educated professional arrogance that makes people say this isn't really what I was hired for? She swept. She swept the front office first, under the desks, along the baseboards, into corners where the dust had compressed itself into something almost structural. She swept the wooden steps outside. She swept the patch of concrete in front of the trailer. Then she opened the door to the back room, and she stood in the doorway with the broom for a long moment. She couldn't sweep in there yet. There was too much on the floor to sweep. She would have to clear the floor before she could sweep it, and before she could clear the floor, she would need to understand what was on it. She went back to the front office, found a legal pad and a pen in the desk drawer, and started making a list. Not of problems, of categories, operating permits, state and federal, environmental compliance records, inspections reports, correspondence, vehicle title and salvage documentation, insurance and liability, employee and contractor records, tax and financial documentation, safety and equipment certifications, client and vendor contracts. She wrote the categories down. Then she wrote them again on 8 separate sheets of paper and taped one to each of the 8 filing cabinets in the back room. She didn't start filing. She just looked at the room for 20 minutes, walking slowly between the stacks, picking up random documents, reading them for 30 seconds, putting them back exactly where she found them. She was learning the landscape. She was figuring out how the chaos had been created, which boxes had been placed first, which piles had grown naturally as paperwork accumulated, where the oldest materials were concentrated, where the most recent things had been dropped. Chaos always had a structure if you looked at it long enough. It was never truly random. It just looked random to people who hadn't spent enough time with it. At 8:15, the door of the trailer opened. A man walked in, 35, maybe 40, medium height, dark hair, an oil-stained work shirt with bones written in marker on the collar. He walked to the front office without looking at her, opened the second desk drawer, retrieved a thick binder, tucked it under his arm, and turned to leave. Then he noticed her standing in the doorway to the back room. He stopped. Who are you? He said. Madison, new records manager. He looked at the legal pad in her hands. What are you doing? Making a map, she said. He looked past her at the room. The boxes, the stacks, the buried table, the filing cabinets with their overfull gaping drawers. Good luck with that, he said, and he left. By noon on the first day, 4 different men had come into the trailer for various reasons. A binder, a specific form, a question about an invoice, and each one had gone through the same sequence, walked in without looking at her, retrieved what they came for, then noticed her standing in the back room and stopped. None of them were hostile. They were something different, something more complicated than hostile. They were watching to see if she would last. She recognized it immediately. It was the same energy she'd felt walking into construction sites during compliance inspections, walking into logistics warehouses during her first year at her company, walking into any space that had been built by people who had decided long ago that outsiders weren't worth investing in because outsiders never stayed. You have to prove you are going to be here tomorrow before anyone will talk to you today. She understood that. She ate lunch. Victor had not been lying when he said the crew ate together. At noon, someone rang a bell, an actual bell mounted on a post outside the main bay, and men came from all directions. She counted 17. They arranged themselves at a series of folding tables set up along the wall of the main bay, pulling food out of coolers and paper bags, handing things to each other with the easy physical language of people who've spent years working close together. She carried her own paper bag, the same lunch she'd packed in the dark at 5:30 a.m. peanut butter and apple slices because it was what she could put together with the groceries she'd bought at the gas station the night before, and sat at the edge of the table nearest the door. Nobody talked to her. Nobody was rude to her either. She was simply not yet a person to them. She was a position records manager. New one probably won't last, and positions were not people until they proved otherwise. She ate her sandwich. She listened. Not to the conversations directly, to the texture of them, the way the men spoke to each other, the shorthand, the recurring names, the jokes that were inside jokes, the complaints that were the same complaints every day, the undercurrent of actual affection that runs under the surface of groups that have worked together for a long time and know each other well enough to fight and forgive without ceremony. She was learning. Victor sat at the far end of the table. He didn't look at Amir. He talked to the man next to him about a compressor that needed replacement and whether it was worth repairing or whether they should just source a different unit. The conversation was technical, specific. She could tell by the way he spoke that he knew exactly what he was talking about, that he hadn't simply inherited this business or purchased it or sat above it in a glass office somewhere. He had built it with his hands, and his hands still knew every part of it. She filed that away too. The first real conversation happened on day 3. She had spent day 1 mapping and day 2 sorting, not filing, not reorganizing, just physically separating the categories she'd identified into labeled zones across the floor and the folding tables she'd cleared so she could see the scope of what existed and what was missing. Day 3, she found it. It was in a box labeled 2021 Miska box, so far back in the corner, so thoroughly buried under other boxes that it would have taken the average person a week to reach it. She found it because she was being systematic, because she was going through everything before she moved anything permanently, because she had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous documents were always the ones that had been put in the wrong place. It was an EPA inspection report from 2021, marked Action Required. She sat on the floor of the back room and read it for 20 minutes. Then she went to the front office and said quietly to Victor, who was at his desk, going through what appeared to be invoices, "I need to talk to you about something I found." He looked up. Something changed in his posture. "Show me," he said. She laid the report on his desk. He read it for a long moment. His expression didn't change, not in any dramatic way, but she watched his jaw tighten and his hands go very still. "This was resolved," he said. "We fixed the drainage issue in 2021. I saw the re-inspection report." "Where is it?" Silence. "If you received a re-inspection report," she said carefully, "and it cleared you, then we need that document. Without it, this," she pointed to the Action Required report, "is the last thing the state has on file for that issue, which means if anyone pulls your regulatory history, it looks like an unresolved violation." Victor set the report down slowly. "Find the re-inspection report," he said. "I'm going to try," she said. "But I need to ask you something first. Was anyone ever sued over the 2021 issue? Any legal correspondence? Anything from an attorney?" He looked at her for a long moment. There might be, he said carefully, a box in the back room that nobody's been allowed to open. She waited. My attorney said not to touch it, said it was, he searched for the word, preserved in case of future litigation. Who's your attorney? Was. He retired 2 years ago, sent everything back to us in a box. Madison closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Okay, she said, I'm going to need to open that box. It's the one with duct tape on every edge. She had seen it on day one. She had cataloged it. She had, in fact, been wondering about it. I'll need you present when I open it, she said, and I'm going to need the name of a current attorney you trust. He gave her a look that was impossible to read. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone who would come in, look at this mess, and try to make it look neater. He paused. You're not trying to make it look neater. I'm trying to make it safe, she said. He picked up his phone. I'll call the attorney, he said. The box contained 17 months of legal correspondence, 3 letters from the EPA, 2 from the State Environmental Agency, 1 from an environmental advocacy nonprofit that had filed a formal complaint about the drainage issue, and at the very bottom in a manila envelope, the original reinspection report, signed and stamped, clearly stating that Iron Ridge Salvage Yard had remediated the drainage issue in full compliance with regulatory standards. Madison sat across from Victor in the front office with everything laid out on the desk between them. The reinspection report exists, she said. It's valid. It's signed by the right person. It clears you completely. Victor looked at it. Then why were we never entered as resolved in the state system, he said. Because someone had to file this with the agency to update the record. And it looks like, she pointed to the cover letter from the retired attorney. Your previous attorney filed a copy but sent it to the wrong regional office. The right office never received it. The record was never updated. Victor was very quiet for a moment. So, for 3 years, he said slowly, we've been sitting on an open violation flag that isn't actually a violation. Yes. And if anyone had pulled our regulatory history, it would have looked like you were out of compliance, she said, which could affect your operating permits, your insurance rates, your ability to bid on certain contracts, or give someone a reason to come after us, Victor said. His voice had gone very flat and very quiet in a way that she was learning more serious than loud. Yes, she said, or that. He looked at the reinspection report for a long moment. Then he looked at her. Fix it, he said. I already drafted the submission to the regional office this morning, she said. I just need your signature and a copy of your current business license to include with it. He stared at her. You drafted it this morning. Before I showed you the original report, I wanted to have the solution ready before I showed you the problem, so you wouldn't have to wait. Something happened in Victor Kane's face then. Something small and significant. Something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't warmth exactly, and it wasn't surprise exactly, but it was real, and it landed somewhere important. He pulled a pen from his vest pocket and held out his hand for the submission form. She gave it to him. He signed it without reading it, and she noticed that. The weight of it. The trust implicit in that gesture from a man who trusted almost nothing. There's a copy of the business license in the front desk, second drawer from the bottom, he said. I know, she said. I found it on day 1. He almost smiled. Almost. By the end of week 1, the Hells Angels of Iron Ridge had not offered her friendship or warmth or acceptance. That wasn't how it worked with them. She understood that. You didn't earn those things in a week. You didn't earn them in a month, probably. But something had shifted. It was small things. Incremental. The way the temperature in a room changes before a storm, you don't see it happen, but suddenly you feel it. The man who'd come in for the binder on day 1 bones, the one who'd looked at her map and said, good luck with that, came in on day 5 and stood in the doorway of the back room and watched her work for a few minutes. You finding things, he asked. Finding a lot of things, she said. Like what? She told him. She told him about the EPA report and the misrouted reinspection clearance and the 3-year-old violation flag that wasn't actually a violation. She told him about the vehicle title records for 63 salvage vehicles that were in the system as sold but lacked proper transfer documentation, which was a problem that could technically constitute a title fraud exposure, even though no actual fraud had occurred. She told him about the 17 different insurance certificates she'd found in various boxes, 4 of which referenced policies that were either expired or superseded. He was quiet for a while. All that from just looking at paper, he said. Paper remembers everything, she said. That's why it matters. He thought about that. My name's Ray, he said. Most people call me Bones. Nice to meet you, Ray, she said. He nodded and left. The next morning, there was a mug of coffee on the desk she used. Black, the way she'd been drinking it. She hadn't told anyone how she took her coffee. The first dinner of Friday end of week 2, she went. She was the only woman there, and she was the newest person there. And she sat at the table and ate barbecue chicken and coleslaw and said almost nothing for the first 2 hours. And that was fine. That was exactly right, because she could feel that showing up was the thing that mattered. That simply being there and eating and not performing friendliness or comfort she didn't actually feel was the correct move. Near the end of the evening, the man who'd been at the gate on her first day, she'd learned his name was Dutch, sat down across from her. Heard you found something, he said. Working on it, she said. Victor says you might have saved us from a problem. Victor's being generous. I found a document someone misfiled 3 years ago. That's not saving anything, that's just reading. Dutch looked at her over his beer. Previous 3 people who had your job couldn't find anything, he said. One of them actively made things worse, so she didn't say anything. Rita was right, he said. The woman from the diner, Victor's aunt, she sends people sometimes. People she thinks might fit, he paused. She's not wrong often. Madison thought about the old woman in the booth, the paper sliding across the table. Go there. They pay on time. Cash, no questions. She didn't tell me any of that, she said. No, Dutch said, she wouldn't. He picked up his beer and went back to the other end of the table. She sat there and finished her plate and listened to the sound of 17 men who had built something together, arguing about a football game and swapping stories she didn't have the context to follow yet. Yet, she noticed that word forming in her own mind, and it surprised her because she had not thought yet about anything in 14 months. She had not thought yet about building something, about being somewhere long enough to have context, about belonging to a yet. She looked down at her plate. She thought, be careful. Be careful with this. Don't let yourself need it too much. But the thought was too late. The thing she'd been missing for 14 months, the thing she'd lost when Derek Whitmore destroyed her company, and Daniel walked out with the house and the world closed, every door she knocked on was already seeping back in. Not safety, not warmth, not acceptance. Something harder and more durable than all of those. Purpose. She drove back to the empty trailer that night, with the desert sky enormous and star-covered overhead. And she sat on the steps and called her sister back in Ohio. And when her sister asked how it was going, Madison Blake said, I think I found something. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Good something or scary something. Madison looked out at the dark shapes of the scrapyard, at the mountains of broken metal, and the lights on the poles casting long shadows. Both, she said. That's usually the real thing, her sister said. Well, no. By the end of month 1, the back room had been transformed. Not cosmetically, not in the way that impresses people who don't understand records management, but in the deep structural way that makes the difference between a business that survives and a business that doesn't. Every document had been cataloged. Every category had a home. The misrouted EPA clearance had been properly refiled with the correct regional office, and the violation flag had been removed from the state system. The expired insurance certificates had been flagged to Victor, who had immediately contacted their broker. The title documentation gap for 63 vehicles had been identified, prioritized by risk, and a remediation plan had been submitted to their attorney. There were more problems. She had known there would be. Missing records from 2015 to 2017, a 2-year gap she couldn't account for. Inspection reports that referenced equipment that didn't appear in the current asset inventory. A contract with a metal recycling vendor that had been renewed 3 times, but in which the original terms had quietly shifted in ways that were unfavorable to Iron Ridge. Each problem she brought to Victor with 2 things: the problem and the solution. She never brought him just the problem. She understood intuitively from years of working with people who ran things, who carried the weight of keeping operations moving, that a person who brings you only problems is a cost. A person who brings you a problem and a solution is an asset. She was determined to be an asset. But something else was happening too. Something she hadn't planned. She was learning the business. Not from the documents alone from the men, from the daily rhythm of the yard, from the conversations she overheard, and the questions she asked carefully one at a time, never probing, never pushing, just genuine curiosity that gradually slowly revealed itself as the kind of understanding that built trust. Bones Ray had started coming to her with questions, not many, but specific ones. A form he needed to understand, a permit process he'd never navigated before, a state regulation that had changed and that he'd been pretending to understand for 2 years. She answered everything without making him feel stupid for asking. That was the thing. That was the invisible thing. She had figured out in the first week that the single most important decision she could make in this place was never to make anyone feel stupid. These men had built something real. They had done it with their hands and their history and their loyalty to each other. The paperwork was a mess, not because they were careless or incompetent, but because paperwork had never been what they were built for. They were built for the physical, the mechanical, the operational. They understood the machines. They understood the work. They had simply never had someone who understood both the work and the paper at the same time. Until now. She was that person. And slowly, not in one dramatic moment, but in the slow accumulation of small moments of problems solved and questions answered, and coffee mugs appearing on desks and names remembered, and conversations started, and confidence earned, she became real to them. Not an outsider, not a position, a person. It was Ray who said it first, 6 weeks in. She was at her desk working on a compliance calendar she'd built from scratch, a month-by-month schedule of every regulatory deadline, inspection window, permit renewal, and documentation requirement. The business faced when he came in, poured himself coffee from the machine, and sat on the edge of Dutch's desk without being asked. "You know what you did?" he said. She looked up. "With the calendar," she said. "With all of it," he said. "You know what this place was like before?" "I got the impression," she said. "No," he said. "I mean, you don't actually know, because you weren't here." He turned his coffee mug slowly in his hands. 3 years ago, we almost lost our operating permit. Completely. Because of the drainage thing and the paperwork disaster and the fact that the inspector who came in couldn't verify a single piece of documentation we had. Victor told us we had 30 days to get compliant or we'd have to shut down. She was very still. "He didn't tell me that," she said. "He wouldn't," Ray said. "Victor doesn't tell people what's at stake when he hires them. He says it changes how they work." She thought about that. "Does it?" she asked. Ray looked at her. "You fixed the problem before you knew what the problem cost us," he said. "So I guess we'll never know." She was quiet for a moment. "How close was it?" she said. "How close to shutting down?" "Close enough that some of the guys started looking for other work," he said. "Close enough that Victor stopped sleeping for 3 weeks. Close enough that—" He stopped, looked at his coffee. "This place isn't just a business. You get that right." "I know," she said. "Some of these guys don't have anywhere else," he said. "Some of them came from bad places, and this was the thing that caught them. Victor built it for that, not just to make money, to have somewhere that would hold." She looked at him. "I understand that better than you might think," she said quietly. He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said, "I'm starting to think you do." He got up, set his empty mug on the counter, turned to leave. "The compliance calendar," he said at the door. "Victor showed it to the attorney this morning. Attorney said he's never seen one that comprehensive from a non-legal professional." He left before she could respond. She sat at her desk for a moment. Then she turned back to her computer and kept working. Because that was the thing about finding something worth building. You didn't stop when someone said it was good. You stopped when it was done. And they were nowhere near done. She didn't know it yet, couldn't have known it, sitting at that desk in that salvage yard, in that forgotten desert town. But the thing that was coming for them all was already in motion. 3 states away, in a glass and steel office building, with its name on the side, a man in an expensive suit was reading a report. A report about Iron Ridge Salvage Yard, about its regulatory history, about its recent improvements, about the newly filed clearance documentation in the updated compliance calendar. In the reorganized records that had suddenly, after years of vulnerability, made the business something that was very hard to threaten. He read the report twice, then he set it down, and he started making calls. His name was Derek Whitmore, and he had not forgotten Madison Blake. He had simply been waiting. The compliance calendar changed things faster than Madison expected. Not because Victor announced it, not because anyone made a speech about it. That wasn't how Iron Ridge worked. Things changed there the way weather changed in the desert, without warning, without ceremony. And then suddenly the air was completely different, and you couldn't remember exactly when it had shifted. It started with the attorney. His name was Paul Garrett, and he'd been Victor's legal counsel for 11 years, a former public defender who'd moved to private practice and specialized in small business law and regulatory compliance in the region. He was 54, bald in the way that men who went bald early eventually make peace with it, and he had the kind of sharp, tired eyes that came from spending decades reading documents that other people had created specifically to obscure the truth. He drove out to Iron Ridge on a Tuesday morning in the 6th week of Madison's tenure, and he sat across from her at his front office desk, and he read through the compliance calendar she'd built page by page, line by line, for 45 minutes without saying a word. Then he set it down and looked at her. "Where did you work before this?" he said. "Environmental compliance firm in Columbus," she said. 8 years. I was operations director." "What firm?" "Blake and Whitmore Environmental Solutions." He wrote it down. She watched him write it and felt the familiar weight of that name, the way it still landed in her chest like something thrown hard, like something that had never quite finished falling. "I've heard of them," he said. "Dissolved, wasn't it, about a year and a half ago?" "Yes." He looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. "And before the dissolution, strong 8-year track record. EPA commendations. 3 consecutive years on the Regional Compliance Excellence Registry. And after..." She met his eyes. "I'm here." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, the way people do when they've decided something but aren't going to say what it is. "This calendar," he said, tapping the document in front of him, "this is not the work of someone who's been out of the field. This is current. This references the amended state reg from March, which most practicing attorneys I know haven't fully digested yet." "I keep up," she said. "Clearly." He turned to Victor, who was sitting at his own desk watching the exchange with his arms crossed. "Victor, this woman should be billing you as a consultant, not working for hourly wages as an office manager." "She's the records manager," Victor said. "She's running your compliance infrastructure," Paul said flatly. "I want her on the call with the EPA regional office next month." Madison looked at Victor. Victor looked at her. "You available?" he said. "I'll be here," she said. That was the first time she understood that the word records manager had become something smaller than what she actually was. She didn't say that out loud. She just filed it away. Paul Garrett left 2 hours later with a copy of the compliance calendar and 3 of Madison's reorganized regulatory files and an expression that suggested he was rethinking some things about his own office's filing system. At the door, he paused. "One more thing," he said. He was looking at Madison, not Victor. "The 2021 drainage issue, the refiled clearance. Have you heard anything back from the regional office?" "Confirmation of receipt," she said. 3 weeks ago. I'm expecting the formal record update within the next 30 days. He raised an eyebrow. "You filed that yourself?" "With Victor's signature." He looked at Victor. "She filed the Brannigan regional submission herself." "I know," Victor said. "That submission has a very specific formatting requirement that most compliance professionals get wrong on the first try. I've refiled that form 4 times for 3 different clients." "I know," Victor said again. His voice was completely neutral, but she caught something underneath it, something that was as close to pride as Victor Kane allowed himself to get about in anyone. Paul Garrett looked at Madison one more time. "Don't leave," he said, simply, like it was advice and a request at the same time. Then he left. Ray walked in from the yard 4 minutes later, poured himself coffee, looked at Madison and said, "What did the lawyer want?" "To talk about the compliance calendar," she said. And apparently I filed a form correctly that most people get wrong." Ray thought about this. "Is that a big deal?" he asked. "Apparently," she said. He nodded slowly in the way he had when she told him about the EPA report, finding that slow, deliberate nod of someone recalibrating. Huh, he said, and went back outside. She smiled at her screen when he left. She couldn't help it. Something was building here. Something real and solid and hers. And she knew with the particular knowledge of someone who had watched something real get destroyed before exactly how fragile it was, and exactly how much it mattered, and exactly what she stood to lose if she let herself believe in it too completely. So she kept her head down, and she kept working. And she didn't notice the car parked across the road from the salvage yard's main gate on 3 separate days that week. A dark blue sedan with out-of-state plates parked just far enough away to seem incidental. She didn't notice it, but Dutch did. He mentioned it to Victor on a Thursday evening when the yard had closed and the crew had gone and the 2 men were doing what they often did at the end of the day, sitting outside the main bay with beer, saying less than they were thinking. "That car again," Dutch said. Victor was quiet. "Third time this week," Dutch said. "I saw it," Victor said. "You want me to?" "Not yet," Victor said. "Not until we know what it is." Dutch took a drink of his beer. "Could be nothing." "Could be," Victor said. He was looking at the main gate, at the sign that said Iron Ridge Salvage, at the yard he'd built from the bones of a used car auction lot and 35 years of work and loyalty. Could be nothing. But his jaw was doing the thing it did, the tightening, the going still, the thing Madison had learned to read in the weeks she'd been there, the thing that meant Victor Kane was processing something he wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Dutch saw it too. He didn't ask again. They sat in the dark and finished their beer and left the rest of the sentence hanging where it was. Some things in Iron Ridge were like that. You learn to wait for the rest of them. The car wasn't there the next morning. Madison drove through the gate at 6:45 and didn't notice anything. She went straight to her desk. She was working on the missing records gap, the 2 years 2015 to 2017, where the documentation had somehow evaporated and she'd gotten a lead. A former bookkeeper who'd worked for Iron Ridge during that period. Dutch had given her a name without explanation. She was trying to find a phone number. She was deep in that when Victor came in at 8:30, which was unusual. Victor was always in the yard in the mornings. He only came to the office when something required him to. "I need to talk to you," he said. She looked up. "Sit down," she said. He did, which was also unusual. Victor Kane did not generally take directions, but he sat, and he looked at her with the expression she'd learned to associate with things that were serious, not alarmed, never alarmed, because Victor Kane didn't do alarmed but waited, heavy in a way that he didn't usually let show. "Someone's been asking questions about us," he said, "in town, at the county records office, pulling our public filings." She went still. "How do you know?" "The woman at the county records office is the wife of one of my guys. She called him last night, said a man in a suit came in 2 days ago and pulled our articles of incorporation, our permit history, our property records." "That's all public record," Madison said carefully. "Anyone can pull those." "I know," Victor said, "but anyone with a reason to want specific things." He asked specifically for our environmental compliance history. She felt something cold move through her. "Our compliance history," she repeated. "Yeah." "Did she get a name?" He paid in cash, used a visitor badge at the desk, gave a name she wrote down. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his vest pocket and pushed it across the desk. She looked at it. She didn't pick it up, because the name written on it in blue ink was one she recognized. D. Whitmore, Chicago, IL. The cold thing moving through her settled somewhere in the center of her chest and stayed there. She picked up the paper, held it, set it back down. "You know that name," Victor said. It was not a question. She had known on some level that this moment would come. She had known it since the day she'd driven through the gates with the handwritten note and the near-empty tank of gas, and the deep, desperate hope that maybe she had finally put enough distance between herself and the wreckage of her old life. She had known that you couldn't outrun certain things. You could only get far enough ahead of them to choose your ground. She had chosen this ground. "Yes," she said, "I know that name." Victor waited. She told him. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. She told him about Derek Whitmore, about the company they'd built together, about the 8 years of work she'd put into building Blake and Whitmore into a firm with a real reputation, and about the slow, calculated way Derek had dismantled all of it, redirecting clients, restructuring contracts, protecting his own exposure while exposing hers, until the company collapsed under the weight of debt and legal disputes that she hadn't known were coming because she hadn't known he'd been building them for years. She told him that Derek Whitmore was very good at two things: identifying valuable targets and finding ways to make their destruction look like their own fault. Victor listened without interrupting. He had a way of listening that was different from most people, a quality of complete attention that made you feel both seen and paradoxically slightly exposed, like something about the act of being truly listened to stripped away the protective layers around the thing you were saying. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Why would he be looking at our compliance history?" he said. "Because that's where he always starts," she said. "With paper, with records, with the documentation that proves or disproves things. He's very good at finding regulatory vulnerabilities and exploiting them. Or manufacturing them. Manufacturing them. He's done it before." She paused. "Not to us, to a client of ours. A medium-sized industrial facility in Indiana that was between two competing corporate interests. He was hired by one side. He identified a legitimate but minor compliance issue, amplified it through strategic regulatory complaints, and then offered a consulting package to help them resolve it. The resolution involved selling a controlling interest to his client." Victor was very still. "He shakes businesses down," he said flatly. "He calls it corporate restructuring advisory," she said. "But yes, and he's here because of us, because of our compliance records. He might not even know I'm here yet," she said, "or he knew exactly where I was and used the compliance records as a pretext. I don't know which one yet." She looked at Victor. "Either way, it means we're being assessed for vulnerability. Whatever he found at the county records office, whatever is still showing in our public regulatory history, he's building something with it." Victor was quiet for 3, 4, 5 seconds, long enough that she could hear the distant sound of the yard, someone running a compressor, the low groan of the crusher starting up. "Is there anything in our history that he can actually use?" Victor said. She had been asking herself that question since she'd seen the name on the paper. "The 2021 violation flag," she said. "The refiled clearance, I submitted it 6 weeks ago, but the formal record update takes 30 to 45 days. If he pulled our history before the update processes, it would still show an open environmental action. Can you speed it up? I can call the regional office today," she said. "Escalate the timeline. But they have their own process. I can't make them move faster than they move." "Try anyway," Victor said. "I will." She paused. "There's something else. The 2015 to 2017 records gap. If there's a missing 2-year documentation period in our compliance history, it's exploitable. Not because anything was actually wrong during that period, but because the absence of records can be read as evidence of things that weren't being recorded, which is different from things that didn't happen. But it's hard to prove the difference to a regulator who's being pushed by a complaint." Victor looked at the ceiling for a moment. "The gap," he said slowly. "That's from when Marcus was running the paperwork." It was the first time she'd heard that name. "Who's Marcus?" she said, a long pause. "Someone who used to work here," Victor said, "who I trusted, who I shouldn't have." She waited. "He was with us for 4 years, Victor said. His voice was completely level in the way that things were levels when they had been leveled by a long time of being something else first. He managed the books and the paperwork. We found out in 2017 that he'd been skimming from vendor payments, small amounts over a long time. When we confronted him, he left, took copies of some documents with him, left other things incomplete or missing." She understood the shape of it now. "He didn't destroy the records," she said slowly. "He just left them in a state where they couldn't be used, disorganized enough that proving what happened during those years would be difficult. That's what we assume," Victor said. "We never pursued it legally. We just tried to move forward." "Do you know where he is now?" "Last I heard, somewhere in Nevada." She thought about Dutch's name on the scrap of paper she'd been given. The former bookkeeper. She thought about the phone number she'd been trying to find that morning. "Victor," she said carefully, "the name Dutch gave me, the person he said had information about the records gap." Victor looked at her. Something shifted. "That's Marcus," she said. "Isn't it?" Victor said nothing for a moment. "Dutch thought maybe it was time," he said, "to reach out, try to recover what can be recovered." "You were already working toward fixing the gap," she said. We were thinking about it, Victor said. After what you'd already found, it seemed worth addressing. She looked at the paper with Derek's name on it. Now it's urgent, she said. Yes, Victor said. Now it's urgent. She picked up her phone. I'm going to call the regional EPA office about the clearance update, she said. And then I'd like to try to reach the person Dutch mentioned, with your permission. Victor stood up. You have it, he said. He walked to the door. Stopped. Madison. He used her name. He didn't usually. The sound of it in his mouth was careful, deliberate, weighted with something she couldn't quite identify. What Whitmore did to your company. Did you know it was happening while it was happening? She thought about that honestly. I knew something was wrong, she said. I didn't know what or how. I kept thinking it was something I was doing, something I could fix if I worked harder or made different decisions. By the time I understood the shape of it, it was too late to stop. Victor was quiet. That's how it works, he said, when someone's good at it. He left. She sat at her desk for a moment with the paper in her hand and the sound of the yard outside and the particular weight of understanding that whatever had been coming was now arrived. Then she picked up the phone and started making calls. The regional EPA office was first. She got through to a coordinator she'd spoken with before a woman named Sandra, who had been cautiously professionally friendly across their prior interactions, and explained that she was calling to check on the timeline for the formal record update on the Iron Ridge Salvage 2021 clearance. Sandra said she'd pull it up. There was a pause of 90 seconds that felt much longer. Mrs. Blake, Sandra said when she came back on the line. Her voice had changed, carefully neutral, in a way that careful neutral voices got when they were delivering information they knew mattered. I'm seeing the file here. Your clearance documentation is complete and verified. The formal record update, another pause. It was processed yesterday. Your record is clean as of 7 a.m. this morning. Madison closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Thank you, Sandra, she said. Of course. Is there anything else? No, she said. That's everything. Thank you. She hung up. She sat with that for a moment. The timing of it. If Derek had pulled the compliance history 2 days ago, he had pulled it while the violation flag was still showing. He had a document, a county records pull showing Iron Ridge Salvage with an open environmental action from 2021. As of this morning, that record was clean. He didn't know that yet. She breathed through that thought carefully. It was an advantage, but a fragile one. The updated public record was available now to anyone who looked. He would look again. He would find the update. His advantage, if that's what he was building it into, would evaporate unless he moved before he looked again. She called Dutch. He picked up on the second ring. Yeah, the name you gave me, she said. The person connected to the records gap. Is that Marcus? A long pause. Victor told you. Yes, I need to reach him. Quickly. Today, if possible. Can you get me a number? Another pause. Longer. Dutch, she said. Something is happening. I don't have time to explain all of it right now, but the 2-year documentation gap, it's about to become a liability we can't afford. I need to know what Marcus took and what he left and whether any of what's missing can be reconstructed. She heard Dutch breathe. He's not going to want to talk, Dutch said. I know, she said. Get me the number anyway. Let me worry about convincing him. 3 minutes later, a number appeared in a text on her phone. No name, just digits. She dialed it. It rang 4 times. She was preparing for voicemail when someone answered. Yeah, a man's voice, flat, guarded. The voice of someone who'd been waiting for a call they didn't want to receive. My name is Madison Blake, she said. I work at Iron Ridge Salvage. I'm the records manager. I'm not calling about what happened between you and Victor. I'm calling about documents, about what happened to the paperwork from 2015 to 2017. Silence. I'm not interested, he said. I know you're not, she said, but I need you to listen to me for 3 minutes because someone is coming for Iron Ridge, and the documentation gap from those 2 years is the thing they're going to use. And if they succeed, it won't matter what happened between you and Victor. It will take down the whole operation and everyone in it. More silence, but he hadn't hung up. Who's coming, he said. His name is Derek Whitmore, corporate consultant. He specializes in regulatory compliance attacks, finding or manufacturing documentation vulnerabilities, and using them to force businesses into settlements or sales. He's been asking questions about Iron Ridge's regulatory history at the county records office. He beat. How do you know that name? Marcus said. Something cold moved through her chest again. You know him, she said. It wasn't a question. She heard it in the fraction of his voice, the way the name had landed, the way he'd asked, how do you know that name, instead of who is that? Marcus, she said, how do you know Derek Whitmore? The silence this time was different, heavier, full of something that was either guilt or fear, or the particular combination of both that came when someone understood they were standing at the edge of a consequence they'd managed to postpone for years. He reached out to me, Marcus said, after I left Iron Ridge, about a year after. Her hand tightened on the phone. What did he want? Information, Marcus said, about the business, the operations, the documentation. He said he was doing research for a regional business analysis. I didn't know who he was. I talked to him for maybe 20 minutes. What did you tell him? Nothing specific, just general stuff. That the records were a mess, that there were gaps, that the compliance history wasn't clean. A pause. I was angry. I said things I probably shouldn't have said. Madison pressed her eyes closed. Marcus, she said, very quietly, very steadily. Did you tell him about the 2021 EP action? A long pause. I might have mentioned there were open issues, he said. I didn't know the details. I just knew there'd been something. She breathed. Okay, she said. Okay, I need to know about the documents from your time there. The 2015 to 2017 records. What happened to them? He was quiet for a moment. Some of them I took copies of, he said, when I let out for protection, in case Victor came after me legally. Protection, she repeated. So you have copies? Yes. Are they organized? A short, humorless laugh. Define organized. Are they findable? If I went through them? Yes, probably. She sat up straighter. I need you to go through them. Today, I need an inventory of what you have. Specifically EP, inspection records, state compliance filings, equipment certifications, and any vendor documentation from those 2 years. Why would I do that? Because Whitmore's coming, she said, and when he comes, he's going to use everything you told him, and you gave him the weapon. The decent thing to do is help blunt it. Silence. That's not a good enough reason, he said, but his voice had shifted, less flat, more complicated. Then do it because those guys built something real, she said, and some of them don't have anywhere else. And whatever happened between you and Victor, it doesn't mean they deserve to lose what they built because someone like Derek Whitmore decided they were an easy target. A long, long silence. I'll look through what I have, he said finally. I'm not promising anything. I know, she said. Thank you. She hung up. She sat at her desk with her hands flat on the surface and her heart going harder than she was letting her face show. Because she'd put something together in the last 90 seconds that she hadn't fully seen before. Derek Whitmore had contacted Marcus a year after he'd left Iron Ridge. Marcus had talked to him, had told him about the documentation gaps, about the open compliance issues. But that was 3 years ago. Why was Derek here now? What had changed? She pulled up her computer and looked at the public filing record for Iron Ridge Salvage, the same record anyone at the county records office could access. She scrolled through it slowly, looking at it through Derek's eyes, through the eyes of someone who was looking for vulnerabilities. And then she saw it. The recent activity timestamp, the filing sheet submitted, the refiled EPA clearance, the updated insurance certificates, the remediated title documentation, all of it visible in the public record, all of it recent, all of it, and this was the thing. This was the piece she'd been missing, representing a significant sudden improvement in a business that had been sitting on documentation problems for years. Derek Whitmore hadn't come because Iron Ridge was vulnerable. He'd come because Iron Ridge was suddenly getting less vulnerable, and he'd needed to move fast because whatever he'd been building, whatever leverage he'd been accumulating from the information Marcus had given him from the compliance history, pulls from the open violation flag that had just been cleared, was closing. Every week Madison spent reorganizing, documenting, and filing was a week his leverage eroded. He had a window, and she had just realized how small it was. She stood up and walked out of the trailer and into the yard and found Victor near the crusher, talking to a mechanic about a hydraulic line. Victor, she said. He looked at her. He registered something in her face. She could tell by the way he ended the conversation with the mechanic immediately and turned to face her fully. He's not just fishing, she said. He's on a deadline. Whatever he's planning, he has to do it soon, before our record gets any cleaner. Victor was very still. How soon, he said. Days, she said. Maybe a week. 2 at the outside. He looked at her for a long moment. What do we do? We keep cleaning, as she said. Faster. Everything I've been working on, we accelerate it. Every document we organize, every missing record we recover, every compliance box we check is something he can't use. We out-document him. And Marcus, he's going to look through what he took, she said. He might have recoverable material from the 2015 to 2017 gap. Victor's jaw did the thing, the tightening. You talked to him, he said. I did. He agreed to help. He agreed to look, she said, which for someone who thinks you might still be angry at him is a version of agreeing to help. Something moved across Victor's face, more complicated than she had words for. The accumulated weight of betrayal and pragmatism, and the understanding that some things mattered more than the score you were owed. Tell him, Victor stopped. Started again. Tell him there's no problem between us. Whatever happened, it's done. He paused. Tell him that from me. She nodded. I'll tell him, she said. She turned to go back to the trailer. Madison. She stopped. When Whitmore gets here, Victor said. He stopped again. He was choosing his words with the particular care of someone who did not choose words carefully as a general rule. He's not coming just for the business, is he? It wasn't a question. She turned around to face him. No, she said. He's not. Victor looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had driven into his yard with a handwritten note and a near-empty tank, and had turned his catastrophic back room into something that was, for the first time in years, actually safe. Who had asked questions nobody else had asked, and found things nobody else had found, and stayed when everyone else had left. Then when he gets here, Victor said, he's going to have to go through all of us to get to you. She looked at him, and because she was someone who had been alone for 14 months, who had sat in a truck in parking lots and sent 47 resumes in a silence, and had a conversation with a stranger in a diner that changed everything, she understood exactly what that sentence cost a man like Victor Kane to say. She didn't cry. She was not a person who cried in front of people, especially not in front of people she was still earning. But she had to look away for a moment. Okay, she said quietly. She went back inside. She called Marcus back with Victor's message. There was a very long silence on the other end of the line. Tell him, Marcus started, stopped. Tell him I've got maybe 40-50 documents from that period. I'll start going through them tonight. Thank you, she said. She hung up. She opened her compliance tracking document and went back to work. Because the things she'd learned from 8 years of compliance work, from 14 months of having nothing, from 6 weeks of building something in a scrapyard that everyone said would never work, was this. The only effective answer to someone trying to destroy you was to be, by the time they arrived, completely undestroyable. They had days, maybe less. She started typing faster. At noon, the bell rang in the yard. Lunch, she didn't go. Ray came to the door of the trailer. Bell rang, he said. I know, she said. Eat without me today. He looked at her for a moment, at the speed of her typing, at the stack of documents she'd pulled from the back room and lined up along the wall beside her desk. What's happening? He said. She looked up. She thought about how much to say and to whom it needed to be said and in what order, and who needed to know what and when. Something is coming, she said, and we need to be ready. I'll explain tonight. Can you get everyone together after the yard closes? Ray looked at her. She could see him recalibrating, going through the same sequence she'd watched him go through every time she gave him new information to categorize surprise assessment, and then the specific settling of someone who has decided to trust. I'll get them together, he said. Thank you, she said. He left. She heard him in the yard a moment later, not calling out, just moving through it, the quiet relay of information that happened in close-knit places where people knew each other well enough to communicate in shorthand. She kept working. Outside, without her seeing it, the men of Iron Ridge Salvage went about their afternoon in a way that looked identical to every other afternoon. Loud, physical, productive, ordinary. But something had changed in the quality of the air. Ray had said 3 words to Dutch. Dutch had said 2 to the man next to him. And by 2 in the afternoon, without any announcement, without any visible shift, every man in that yard was working slightly harder, slightly faster, with slightly more attention to what was around them. The way people do when someone they trust has told them without using those words to be ready. Madison didn't see any of it. She was inside building a wall out of paper. The best kind of wall, the kind that a man like Derek Whitmore had no idea how to get through, because he had built his whole career on finding the cracks in things. And she had spent 6 weeks filling every crack she could find. The question was whether she'd filled enough of them. She was going to find out very soon. The evening meeting happened in the main bay. Victor hadn't announced it formally. He didn't need to. By the time the yard closed at 4, Ray had done what Ray did, moved through the space, said the right things to the right people in the right quiet way, and by 4:15, every man who worked at Iron Ridge Salvage was either sitting or standing in the main bay with a beer or a water or nothing at all, waiting without being told exactly what they were waiting for. Madison stood at the front. She had never addressed all of them at once before. She had spoken to individuals, to small groups, to Victor and Paul Garrett in the trailer. But this was different. This was 17 men who had watched 3 previous people fail at her job, who had been skeptical of her from day one, who had only recently begun slowly and without fanfare to trust her. And she was about to tell them that the thing she'd been working to prevent was already in motion. She didn't ease into it. "Someone named Derek Whitmore has been pulling our regulatory filings at the county records office," she said. "He's a corporate consultant who specializes in regulatory compliance attacks. He identifies documentation vulnerabilities in small businesses, files strategic complaints with regulatory agencies, and uses the resulting pressure to force settlements. He's been doing it for 10 years, and he's very good at it." The bay was very quiet. "He came after your records because 3 weeks ago our public filing history still showed an open EPA action from 2021. As of yesterday morning, that record is clean. But he pulled our history before the update processed. He has a document showing a violation flag that no longer exists." Dutch said from the back of the room. "Can he use a document that's outdated?" "He can try," she said. "A fraudulent regulatory complaint doesn't have to be current to create pressure. The goal isn't to prove the violation. The goal is to trigger an official response from the agency, which creates uncertainty, which costs money to defend, which is sometimes enough to make a business owner decide that settling is easier than fighting." "In the 2015 to 2017 gap," Victor said. He was standing to her left, arms crossed, watching the room as much as he was watching her. "That's the other piece he knows about," she said. "Someone gave him information about our documentation problems, including the gap years." She paused. "That person has since agreed to help us recover what's missing. We may be able to reconstruct most of the gap within a few days." She watched the room, watched the men look at each other, the particular communication of people who had history together, who understood things in the exchange of a glance that would take anyone else a paragraph to explain. Nobody asked who the source was. She was grateful for that. "So what's he going to do?" Ray said. He was standing near the front, and his voice had the quality it got when he was working something out, not asking for reassurance, asking for the map. "He's going to come here," she said. "Not to the records office. Here, in person, with paperwork, probably with legal documentation, cease and desist language, regulatory complaint, copies, formal notices. He'll make it look official. He'll make it look inevitable. He'll present it as something you can either fight expensively or settle cheaply. And the settlement involves what Paul Garrett said from the side wall. She had called him that afternoon, and he had driven back out without being asked twice. Typically in cases like this, she said, the settlement involves a consulting arrangement. He comes in supposedly to help you achieve compliance, and in the process gains access to your operations, your financials, your contracts. From there, it escalates. Equity stakes, restructuring. In the worst cases, acquisition at below market value with the regulatory threat hanging over the deal as leverage. The bay was silent for a moment. Then a man named Cole, one of the quieter ones who worked the back section of the yard and had spoken to Madison maybe 6 times in 6 weeks, said very simply he wants the yard. Or he wants something found connected to the yard, she said. I don't know yet what his specific objective is, but yes, that's the shape of it. Victor spoke. When does he come? I don't know exactly, she said. But based on how he operates, he'll come when he believes the pressure is highest, when he thinks we're most afraid, which means he'll try to come before we have time to fully address the documentation vulnerabilities he knows about. So days, Victor said. Days, she confirmed. The room was quiet again. She looked at the men in it at the particular combination of anger and steadiness that she'd come to understand was the emotional register of this group under pressure. Not fear, not panic, the kind of solid, cold focus that came from people who had faced difficult things before and had learned that the worst possible response was to flinch. What do you need from us? Dutch said. She had been prepared for a lot of possible responses to this meeting. Skepticism, questions about whether she was overreacting, pushback on involving themselves in something legal and complicated. She had not fully prepared herself for how simply and directly that question would be asked. What do you need from us? Not what are we going to do? Not how do we fight this? Not why should we trust you? Just what do you need? She steadied herself. Keep working, she said. Keep the yard operating normally. Don't change anything visible. If he arrives and finds a business running exactly as it always has, it reinforces that there's nothing to be afraid of. The worst thing we could do is look like a place that's bracing for impact. And behind the scenes, Ray said. Behind the scenes, I need 48 hours, she said. Paul is going to help me build a complete compliance defense package. Every permit, every inspection record, every certificate, every filing organized, verified, and ready to present at a moment's notice. If he walks in with a complaint about our environmental history, I want to be able to put 35 years of clean documentation on the table in front of him before he finishes his first sentence. Paul Garrett from the side wall said, I've seen compliance attorneys charge $60,000 to build what she just described. She's going to do it in 48 hours. Nobody laughed. They just looked at her. She looked back at them. One more thing, she said. When he comes, and he will come, nobody talks to him except me and Victor. Nobody. I don't care how he presents himself, what kind of official language he uses, or how confident he sounds. He is going to be very polished and very calm, and he is going to make everything he says sound completely reasonable. That's what makes him dangerous, so nobody talks to him. What if he pushes? Cole asked. Let him push, she said. He can push at a locked door for as long as he likes. The meeting broke up 30 minutes later. The men filed out of the bay in ones and twos, and some of them nodded to her as they passed, not the big performative nod of people trying to be encouraging, but the small, deliberate nod of people who have decided something and are communicating it without words. She was one of them now. She hadn't noticed the exact moment it happened. She suspected it had been happening incrementally, the way everything at Iron Ridge happened slowly and then completely without ceremony. Victor stayed after the others left. He waited until the bay was empty, then walked over to where she was standing. Paul's right, he said. $60,000, at least. I'm not billing you $60,000, she said. I know, he said. That's what I mean. He paused. Whatever your salary is right now, it's wrong. We'll fix it when this is over. She started to say something deflecting. He stopped her. Not a negotiation, he said. Just a fact. She nodded. Go home, he said. Sleep. You start the defense package at 6 tomorrow morning, and you're going to need to be sharp. She went back to the trailer. She sat on the steps for a while in the dark, the way she had in her earliest weeks there, and she called her sister. Her sister answered on the first ring, which meant she'd been waiting. How bad is it? Her sister said. He's here, Madison said. Or close. He's been pulling our records. Silence on the other end of the line. Madison. I know. You need to be careful. You know what he did last time. This isn't last time, Madison said. Last time I was alone. Last time I didn't see it coming until it was already done. Last time I didn't have... She stopped. Didn't have what? Her sister said. She looked at the dark shapes of the yard, the mountains of metal, the lights on the poles. Back up, she said. Her sister was quiet for a moment. "These people," she said finally, "these bikers, you trust them?" "Yes," Madison said, without hesitation. "After 6 weeks." "After 6 weeks," she confirmed. "Some people you know in a year and they're still strangers. Some people you know in 6 weeks and you understand exactly who they are." Her sister was quiet again. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, call me tomorrow." "I will." She went inside. She set an alarm for 5. She did not sleep particularly well, but she slept, which was enough. She was at her desk at 5:58 a.m. Paul Garrett arrived at 6:30. They worked for 11 straight hours. The defense package was built the way she built everything systematically from the ground up, with attention to the specific structure of how regulatory complaints were filed and how they were reviewed and what a regulator would need to see to dismiss a complaint quickly and cleanly. Paul contributed the legal architecture, the precise language, the correct submission formats, the procedural knowledge of how state environmental agencies processed incoming documentation. She contributed the substance, the 35 years of operational history she had spent 6 weeks excavating and organizing and verifying. By noon, Marcus had called. "I've got 38 documents from the gap years," he said. "Inspection reports, 2 EPA correspondence letters, equipment, certifications, and a set of vendor compliance records." "Can you scan and send them?" she said. "Already did," he said. "Check your email." She pulled them up, went through them in 15 minutes. 15 minutes of focused, trained attention, the way a doctor reads a scan, not seeing everything at once, but knowing exactly what she was looking for and where it would appear. "Marcus," she said, "this is enough. With what we already have from the existing files, this fills most of the gap." A pause, he saw. "Good, my Ninian," he said. Then after another pause, "How's is the place okay, the yard?" "So, it's standing," she said. "Good," he said again. "It should stand." She thought about saying something more, about how what he'd done had hurt people, about how 4 years of loyalty being undone by anger and resentment and bad choices had left a scar in this place that she was still finding traces of. She thought about saying all of that. She said, "Victor said there's no problem between you. Whatever happened, it's done." The silence on the other end of the line lasted long enough that she thought the call had dropped. "Then tell him," a long pause, "tell him I'm sorry, for real." "I'll tell him," she said. She hung up and kept working. At 3 p.m., Paul sat back in his chair and looked at the binders they'd assembled, 4 of them color-coded by category, each section tabbed and indexed and cross-referenced. "This is the most complete small business compliance defense package I have ever seen," he said. "Is it enough?" she said. "If he comes in with anything short of a fabricated document, and I mean a document that has been actively forged, not just misrepresented, we can answer it," Paul said. "Completely. On the spot. Without stalling, without asking for time, without giving him any of the room he needs to make his pressure feel real. And if he has a fabricated document," Paul looked at her steadily, "then we have a different kind of problem. But we also have a different kind of answer." She understood what he meant. A fabricated document was evidence of a crime, and evidence of a crime could be used in ways that compliance documentation couldn't. She filed that away. "He'll be here tomorrow," she said. It wasn't a prediction exactly. It was the thing she felt in the architecture of everything, the timeline, the pace of his moves, the narrowing window of his advantage. Tomorrow was the day that felt like the day. Paul looked at her. "How do you know?" "Because it's what I would do," she said. "If I were him, if I'd been building this for weeks and I knew the window was closing. Tomorrow is when the pressure is maximum and the target is most likely to make a decision they'll regret." Paul was quiet for a moment. "You know how he thinks," he said. "I spent years watching him think," she said. "I just didn't know that's what I was doing." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll be ready," he said. "Tomorrow morning. I'll be here at 7. 6, she said. 6, he agreed. He left at 3:30. She stayed. She went through the binders one more time. Not because they weren't ready, because she needed to know them the way she knew her own name, instantly, completely, without having to search for anything in the moment when it mattered most. She was still at her desk at 6 in the evening when Victor came in. He looked at the binders, at her face, at the quality of the room, which had changed in the way rooms change when serious work has been done in them, a density in the air, a purposeful organization to the disorder. "You haven't eaten," he said. "I had coffee," she said. "That's not the same thing." "I know." He left, came back 12 minutes later with a plate of food she recognized from the main bay. Someone had cooked the way they did some evenings, big simple food that fed whoever was still around. He set it on her desk without ceremony. "Eat," he said. She ate. He sat across from her while she did not talking, just being there in the particular way Victor Kane was, there, solid and present, and not requiring anything from the silence. "I told the crew you need them sharp tomorrow," he said. "You think he'll bring people with him," she said. "Men like that always bring people with them," Victor said. "It's how they make the room feel small." She thought about that, about Derek Whitmore in a room with his expensive suit and his careful calm and his talent for making every option, except the one he was offering, seem impossible. She had seen it before. She had been in rooms where he did it and had watched people capitulate to things they never should have capitulated to because he made the alternative feel unsurvivable. "He's very good at intimidation," she said. "He doesn't do it loudly, he does it with logic. He presents a situation as already settled, like all the decisions have already been made, and you're just catching up to the reality he's constructed." Victor was looking at her. "You know what that is," he said. "What?" "That's a con," he said flatly, "dressed up in paperwork. But it's a con. And the only way a con works is if the mark believes it." She looked at him. "We don't believe it," he said. She almost smiled. "No," she said. "We don't?" He stood up. "Get some sleep tonight, real sleep." "I'll try," she said. "Madison." He paused at the door. "You said you know how he thinks, that you watched him for years." He looked at her with his dark, steady eyes. "You also know how he loses." She thought about that. "Yes," she said slowly. "He loses when the target knows more than he expects them to. He builds everything on the assumption that the other side is disorganized, afraid, and reactive. When they're not," she paused, "he doesn't have a second plan. He's never needed one." Victor nodded once. "Good," he said, and left. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she closed the binders, turned off her desk lamp, and went to the trailer to sleep. He came the next morning at 10. She was at her desk when Dutch walked in without knocking, which was notable because Dutch always knocked. It was one of the small social protocols he maintained, regardless of circumstance, and said, "Dark blue sedan, parked at the gate, 3 people." She stood up. "How many?" she said. Driver stayed in the car. 2 came out. Whitmore and a woman with a briefcase. Expensive looking. Young. "Attorney," she said. "That's what I figured." Paul Garrett was at the other desk. He looked up from his phone. "Ready?" "Ready," she said. She straightened her jacket. She had worn the same thing she'd worn on her first day, dark jeans, a plain dark top, flat shoes. She had considered wearing something more formal and decided against it. She wasn't performing anything. She was herself in this room, in this place, doing this job. "Tell them to come in," she said to Dutch. Dutch looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his big, weathered face, something she didn't have a word for but recognized as a form of feeling. He nodded and left. Victor came in through the side door 30 seconds later. He stood to the left of her desk, arms crossed, and said nothing. Ray came in behind him and stood near the back wall. Cole was outside the trailer door. She knew, not because anyone had assigned him there, but because he'd been standing outside when she came in that morning, and she'd understood without asking that he planned to stay. The yard was still running. She could hear it through the walls, the sound of Iron Ridge operating exactly as it always had, the machinery, the movement, the work. Normal, deliberate, undisturbed. Then the door opened, and Derek Whitmore walked into her life again. He was exactly as she remembered. That was the thing about certain kinds of people. They didn't change because they didn't need to. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of face that photographed as trustworthy and read in person as calculating. Silver hair he'd grown out since she'd last seen him. Better shoes. But the same eyes, pale gray, interested with the specific quality of a man who was always doing 2 things at once, engaging with what was in front of him and calculating what it was worth. He saw her before he saw anyone else in the room, and for one fraction of 1 second, less than a breath, barely a flicker, she saw something cross his face that he didn't intend to show. He hadn't known she was here. He had known Iron Ridge Salvage had made recent improvements to its documentation. He had known someone with real compliance knowledge had been working here. He had not known it was her. She saw it, and then he controlled it. He folded it back behind his professional face and smiled the smile she remembered, warm and slightly weary, the smile of someone who wanted you to feel like they were on your side. "Madison," he said. "What a genuinely unexpected surprise." "Hello, Derek," she said. Her voice was completely even. She had prepared for the sound of his voice. She had practiced in the shower that morning, hearing it and not reacting. She'd done a good job. "This is Victor Kane, owner of Iron Ridge Salvage, and Paul Garrett, our legal counsel." Derek's eyes moved to Victor, assessed him in the way he assessed everything quickly, thoroughly, with the filing cabinet efficiency of someone who had made a career of understanding what people had to lose. "Mr. Kane," he said. He held out his hand. Victor looked at it for a moment. Then he shook it briefly once and dropped it. "Mr. Whitmore," Victor said. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet," Derek said in the tone that implied the meeting had been arranged and agreed upon in advance, which it had not been. Madison recognized the move. It was his standard opening, define the frame before anyone else gets to make it seem like everyone had consented to the situation. "I'm sure you're aware we could have done this through formal channels, but I've always believed that direct conversation is more productive for everyone." "What channels?" Paul said pleasantly. He had his legal pad open. "You haven't filed anything." A beat, very small. Derek recovered it immediately, but she'd seen it. "Not yet," Derek said equally pleasantly. "That's why we're here, to discuss whether formal filing is necessary." He gestured to the woman beside him. Early 30s sharp suit, the kind of focused neutrality that legal associates were trained to maintain in rooms like this. "This is Claire, HSU Regulatory Counsel. She's been reviewing Iron Ridge's compliance history." "As has our counsel," Madison said, "which is why we're not concerned about the formal process." Derek looked at her. The warmth in his expression thinned by exactly 1 degree. "You've been busy," he said. "It's the job," she said. He let a moment pass. Then he opened the briefcase Claire Sue held out to him and withdrew a document printed bound professional looking the way all of his documents always looked. "I'll get to the point," he said, setting the document on her desk. "Iron Ridge Salvage has an open environmental action from 2021 in the state compliance registry, a drainage issue that was flagged and never formally resolved. Based on our review of the regulatory history, the facility has been operating under this unresolved action for 3 years, which constitutes a continuing violation under State Environmental Code section. That record was updated Monday morning," Paul said. He said it the way you set something down on a table, cleanly, without emphasis. "The 2021 drainage remediation was fully compliant. The clearance documentation was refiled with the correct regional office 6 weeks ago, and the formal record was updated at 7 a.m. 72 hours ago. Do you want the confirmation number?" Derek did not look at Claire Sue. That was discipline. Most people would have looked. "The record I'm referencing," he began, "is 3 days old," Madison said. She opened the top binder on her desk, the red one, EP, a history, and withdrew a single page. She slid it across the desk toward him. "Current state registry printout. Timestamp this morning. The action is resolved. The record is clean." He looked at the document. She watched him read it. She watched the calculation happening behind his eyes, the rapid reassessment, the scanning for alternative approaches, the professional composure that never broke on the surface but was working hard underneath. "Records can be administratively updated without the underlying issues being fully resolved," he said. He was pivoting. She had expected this. "The question is whether the physical remediation is documented in our files," she said. She opened the binder to the tab section. Contractor Invoice and Site Verification Report 2021. Engineering Assessment confirming compliance with remediation standards. Photographic documentation from the post-remediation inspection. Third-party site survey from an independent environmental engineer. She paused. "Would you like copies?" Claire Sue was watching her with an expression that was professional, neutral on the surface, but something else just underneath it. Not hostility, something more like the recognition of a person who knows what they're seeing. Derek set the document down. "The 2015 to 2017 documentation period," he said, "shows a gap in organized records during a period of staff transition," Madison said. "We've been in the process of reconstructing those records. As of yesterday, we have complete EPM inspection correspondence equipment, certifications, and environmental compliance filings covering the entire period. Organized and verified. She opened the second binder. Would you like to review them? The room was very quiet. Not tense exactly. Something more complicated than tense. The quality of a room in which one person had prepared for a conversation and another person was discovering in real time that the conversation they'd planned to have no longer existed. Derek Whitmore looked at her, and for the first time in all the years she'd known him, in all the meetings she'd sat across from him, in all the moments she'd watched him manage rooms and people in situations, she saw him at a loss. Not broken, not panicked. He was too controlled for that, but genuinely for this moment without a prepared next move. Madison, he said, his voice had changed. The professional frame had thinned enough that something more personal was showing through it. We don't have to do this. Do what, she said. Be adversaries. He spread his hands in the gesture she remembered, the open-palmed, reasonable gesture. I came here because there's an opportunity, a real one. The recycling sector in this region is consolidating. There are investors looking for established operations with strong land positions and existing licensing. Iron Ridge has both. I'm not here to threaten anything. I'm here to present an option. She looked at him. She thought about how many times she had seen this move. The pivot from pressure to opportunity. The reframing of an attack as an offer. The suggestion that what had just happened, the documents, the regulatory language, the briefcase full of compliance threats, was merely an opening to a conversation about something mutually beneficial. Then why bring regulatory documentation? Paul said, nodding at the document Derek had set on the desk. Due diligence, Derek said smoothly. Any serious investor needs to understand the compliance landscape before you brought it to threaten us, Victor said. His voice was very flat and very quiet. The room stopped. Derek looked at him. Mr. Kane, he said carefully, I understand why it might seem you came in here with a document you knew was outdated because you were hoping we didn't know that, Victor said. That's not due diligence, that's a bluff. And we don't negotiate with bluffs. Derek was quiet for a moment, long enough that the silence itself became a kind of statement. Then he looked at Madison again. You prepared them, he said. I work here, she said. Something moved across his face, more complicated than anything he'd shown before. She had known Derek Whitmore for years, had worked beside him, entrusted him and watched him take apart everything she'd built, and she had never seen him look at her the way he looked at her in that moment. Not quite respect, not quite anger. Something that was both twisted together into an expression she didn't have a name for. When did you find out I was coming, he said. When you walked in the door just now, she said. Although we knew someone was pulling our records earlier this week. And you built all of this, he gestured at the binders, without knowing if it was me. I built it because this business deserved to be protected, she said, regardless of who was coming. He was quiet. Claire Shue had her pen down. She was watching the exchange the way someone watches something they know they're going to be thinking about later. This isn't over, Derek said. His voice was still controlled, but the professional warmth was gone entirely now. What was underneath it was colder and more honest, and she thought more real. There are other angles to this. I know there are, she said. There always are with you. She met his eyes. But I'm not in Columbus anymore, Derek. I'm not working with one partner and limited resources and a client base you could peel away while I wasn't looking. I have a legal counsel and a complete compliance infrastructure and 35 years of documented operational history. And I have people. She said that last part deliberately. She said it so he would feel the weight of it, the specific weight of people who were not going to move. Derek looked at Victor, then at Ray standing at the back wall, then at the door which he could not see through, but beyond which she knew Cole was standing. He closed his briefcase. We'll be in touch, he said. Through our attorney, Paul said pleasantly. Here's his card. Derek took the card. He looked at it. He looked at Madison one more time, that complicated, unreadable look, and then he walked out. Claire Shue followed him. At the door she paused. She looked at Madison. She didn't say anything. She just nodded once, a small, precise professional nod that meant something Madison understood and filed away for later. Then she was gone. The trailer door closed. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Ray said from the back of the room, "That's it." "For now," Madison said. "He'll come back," Victor said. "He said he would," she said, "and he meant it. He's not done." She looked at Paul. "There are other angles. He wasn't wrong about that. He'll look for something we missed, something we can't document, something personal. He always has more than one approach." Paul was already making notes. "I'll run a full search on him tonight. Any regulatory complaints he's been associated with, any litigation, any disciplinary actions. If he's done this before, he's done it before," she said. "I can give you 4 specific businesses from the past 7 years. I can give you names, dates, outcomes." Paul looked up. "You've been compiling this," he said. "For a year and a half," she said. "Since I figured out what he did to our company, I kept a file." The room was quiet again. Victor was looking at her with the expression she still didn't have a complete name for the one that had first appeared when she'd handed him a solution the same moment she handed him a problem. It was something in the region of recognition, of seeing something clearly for the first time that you had been looking at from the wrong angle before. "A year and a half," he said quietly. "I didn't know how I was going to use it," and she said, "I just knew I needed to have it." He nodded. "Send Paul everything you have," he said. She turned to her computer. Her hands were not shaking. She had expected them to shake in the aftermath of Derek standing in this room, of hearing his voice, of facing the things she had been running from for 14 months. She had expected some version of the collapse that happens after adrenaline fades, but her hands were steady. Ray came up beside her desk. He stood there for a moment, not saying anything, which was a thing she had come to understand was his version of checking in. "You okay?" he finally said. "Yes," she said. "You sure?" She looked up at him, at his face weathered and careful and genuinely concerned in the unpretentious way that was the only kind of concern Ray allowed himself. "He's smaller than I remembered," she said. Ray looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Men who try to make themselves big by making other things small always are." She stared at him. He shrugged. "My mother used to say that." "Your mother was wise," she said. "Don't tell her that," he said. "She'll never let me hear the end of it." She almost laughed. Actually, almost laughed, which was remarkable given everything. She turned back to her computer. She began pulling the file she'd kept for a year and a half, the document that had grown page by page in the time since she'd stood in the ruins of her company and started understanding what had happened to it. The file she had built not knowing where it would be used, or when only knowing that she needed to build it, because the truth mattered even when no one was ready to hear it yet. She sent it to Paul. Then she sat back in her chair and breathed. Outside, the yard ran. The bell rang for the afternoon break. Someone laughed about something loud and unself-conscious, the laugh of a person who feels safe enough to be loud. Derek Whitmore was in a dark blue sedan somewhere on the road out of Iron Ridge. He was not finished. She knew that, but neither was she. And this time, for the first time since all of this had started, she was not finishing something alone. Paul Garrett called at 7:14 the next morning. Madison was already at her desk. She had been there since 6, working through the secondary documentation, the vendor contracts, the equipment certifications, the safety inspection records, because she understood that Derek Whitmore's first visit had been a probe, not an attack. He had come to see what they had. He had found more than he expected. He would go back now and recalibrate, find the angle he'd missed, come back with something sharper. She intended to close every gap before he did. Her phone rang and she picked it up before the second ring. "Tell me," she said. "I spent last night going through the file you sent me," Paul said. His voice had the quality it got when he was processing something significant, stripped of its usual professional warmth, tight and focused. "Madison, this is not a file someone puts together in a year and a half. This is a prosecutorial brief." She was quiet for a moment. "I know what it is," she said. 4 businesses, Paul said. 4 documented cases where Derek Whitmore identified a regulatory vulnerability, filed or coordinated the filing of a formal complaint, and then inserted himself as a consultant during the resulting uncertainty. In 3 of those 4 cases, the business owner ended up in a settlement arrangement that resulted in Whitmore or his affiliated entities acquiring equity stakes. "The 4th one fought him," she said. "The 4th one fought him and won," Paul said. "A trucking company in Missouri. They had an attorney who knew what was happening and moved fast enough to get an injunction on the complaint process. Whitmore withdrew. He withdrew because the injunction exposed the complaint as coordinated, she said. He relies on the process looking independent. Once it looks coordinated, it becomes something else legally. Witness to a pattern, Paul said. Yes, he paused. Madison, did you keep this file because you were planning to do something with it? I kept it because I needed to know the truth about what happened to me, she said. And because I thought that someday someone might need what was in it. A long pause. Can I ask you something personal? Paul said. You can ask. The company he destroyed, Blake and Whitmore. You co-founded it. You built it for 8 years. What was it worth at its peak? She had not thought about this number in a long time. She had worked very hard not to think about it, because thinking about it led to a specific kind of rage that wasn't useful and took up space she needed for other things. Conservative estimate, about $4 million in firm value, she said. Client-based contracts, reputation licensing, maybe more. Paul was quiet. He walked away with all of it, she said. Restructured under his own entity after the dissolution. Same clients, same contracts, different name. Where is it now, the firm? Still operating, she said. Under the name Whitmore Environmental Advisory. Annual revenue approximately $2.3 million, based on the last public disclosure I could find. Paul exhaled slowly. Madison, he said. What I'm looking at in this file, if it were organized correctly and submitted to the right people, this isn't just a defense against what he's doing to Iron Ridge. This is potential evidence of a pattern of business fraud. She had known that. She had known it for a year and a half and had done nothing with it because she'd had no standing, no resources, no allies, and no platform from which to do anything. You didn't go up against someone like Derek Whitmore with nothing. You needed something solid underneath you first. She thought about the broom Victor had given her on the first morning, the back room full of 35 years of forgotten truth, the compliance calendar, the 4 binders, Marcus's documents, 6 weeks of building something solid in a place everyone said was impossible to build anything. I know, she said. Who else have you told about this file? No one until I sent it to you last night. Victor. Not yet. You need to tell him, Paul said immediately. Today. What's in this file changes the scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't just about protecting Iron Ridge from a regulatory complaint anymore. This is about, he paused, choosing his words. This is about whether Derek Whitmore gets to keep doing this. She sat with that for a moment. She had protected the file for a year and a half. She had carried it through Columbus and Cincinnati and Pittsburgh and a desert highway and a salvage yard. She had kept it the way you keep something you know matters, but don't yet know how carefully, privately close. I'll talk to Victor this morning, she said. I'm going to make some calls, Paul said. I have a contact at the state AG's office. I want to understand what they'd need to open an inquiry. Paul, she stopped him. Before you make those calls, be sure. Once this moves, it moves. There's no quiet version of what you're describing. I know, he said. Are you sure? She thought about the woman she'd been 14 months ago, standing in a parking lot in Columbus with everything she'd built turned to ash and no understanding of why. Sending resumes into silence, sleeping in her truck, driving toward a gate that nobody else would walk through. Yes, she said, I'm sure. She hung up and sat for exactly 1 minute without moving. Then she went to find Victor. He was in the yard where he always was in the mornings talking to a man named Garrett, not the attorney, a different Garrett who worked the salvage line and had a laugh like a foghorn and had started bringing Madison coffee without being asked 3 weeks ago. They were looking at something in an engine compartment and the conversation was technical, and she waited at the edge of it until Victor saw her and read her face the way he'd learned to read it, not dramatically, just the small tightening of attention that meant he understood she needed him now. He said something brief to Garrett, who nodded and went back to what he was doing and walked over to her. Paul called, she said. I figured, he said. Walk with me. They walked toward the back of the yard away from the noise of the machinery to the quieter section near the fence, where the oldest salvage sat cars from the 80s and 90s stripped and stacked waiting for their final processing. She told him about the file. She told him all of it. What she'd built over a year and a half, working backward from the collapse of her company, the 4 businesses, the pattern, the documented sequence of complaint, consultation, and acquisition. The Missouri trucking company that had fought and won, the 3 that hadn't, the firm value she'd lost. The $2 million operation Derek was currently running on the foundation of what he'd taken from her. Victor listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. They had stopped walking. The yard sounds were distant enough that she could hear the wind moving through the lot. "You've been carrying this the whole time," he said. "Yes." "Since before you came here?" "Yes." "And you didn't say anything because it wasn't relevant to the Titbibai," she said. "And because I needed to do the job before anything else. I needed to build something real here before I had the standing to use what I knew." She paused. "And honestly, I needed to trust someone before I handed them something that important." He looked at her. "You trust us now," he said. "Not a question." "I trust you now," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for another long moment, looking at the old cars, the things that had come here broken and been slowly, patiently reduced to their essential components. "What does Paul want to do?" he said. "Make calls to the state AG's office," she said. "Understand what an inquiry would need. If the file is as strong as he thinks." "Is it?" "Yes," she said simply. "Then it moves," Victor said. He said it the way he said most things, without decoration, without drama, with the directness of someone who had made decisions for a long time and had learned that hesitation was its own kind of choice. If this man has done to 4 other businesses what he did to yours and what he tried to do here, then it moves. She had expected him to think about it longer, to weigh the risk, the exposure, the attention, the disruption of being involved in a legal proceeding that had nothing technically to do with Iron Ridge Salvage. She had underestimated him. "Victor," she said, "this could bring attention to Iron Ridge that you might not want. Media, legal proceedings, people looking closely at the business." "Let them look," he said. "You spent 6 weeks making sure there's nothing to find." She almost smiled. "There's something else," she said. "Something Paul didn't say explicitly, but that I've been thinking about since I got off the phone with him." He waited. "Derek didn't pick Iron Ridge at random," she said. "He knew about the compliance vulnerabilities because Marcus told him 3 years ago. But that was 3 years ago. Something triggered him to move now. Something made this yard specifically interesting enough to come after at this particular moment." Victor was very still. "What?" he said. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I think we need to find out. Because if he has a specific objective here, something beyond the pattern of extract and acquire that he's done before, we need to understand what it is before he comes back." Victor looked at her for a long moment. "The land," he said slowly. She waited. "The land this yard sits on," he said. "We own 43 acres. We bought the original parcel in 1987 and added to it 3 times. The last edition was 2019. He paused. "There's been some interest from a development group over the last 18 months. Letters, inquiries. We turned them all down." She felt something align inside her, the click of a puzzle piece finding its place. "What development group?" she said. "Company called Meridian Land Partners," he said, "based out of Phoenix. They've written to us 4 times. We never responded after the first one." "Do you still have the letters?" "Probably in the back room somewhere." "Find them," she said. He pulled out his phone and called Dutch, who apparently functioned as his external memory for administrative things, and within 4 minutes, Dutch had confirmed the letters were in the filing cabinet that Madison had labeled Correspondence External 3rd Drawer, sorted by year. She was back at her desk in 8 minutes. The letters were exactly where Dutch said they were. 4 of them, Meridian Land Partners. Phoenix AZ, formal but warm, expressed interest in acquiring the Iron Ridge salvage property for a mixed-use development project. Offered preliminary valuations that increased with each letter, the final one dated 11 months ago, referencing a per-acre price that she did a quick calculation on and then sat back in her chair. 43 acres at that price was just over $12 million. She pulled up her laptop and searched Meridian Land Partners. It took her 6 minutes to find what she was looking for. Meridian Land Partners was a Phoenix-based real estate development entity incorporated in 2018. Its registered agent was a law firm in Phoenix. Its managing member, according to the Secretary of State filing, was listed as an entity called WEM Capital Holdings, LLC. She searched WEM Capital Holdings, LLC. Delaware Incorporation, 2017. Single-member entity. Managing member, Derek A. Whitmore. She sat very still at her desk. She thought about the sequence. Derek Whitmore had acquired land in the region, or partnered with someone who had and needed this property. He'd heard from Marcus years ago that Iron Ridge had compliance vulnerabilities. He'd sent 4 increasingly generous acquisition offers over 18 months, all of which had been ignored. He'd watched the compliance record improve dramatically over the last 6 weeks and understood that his regulatory pressure window was closing. So he'd come in person with the outdated complaint documentation to apply enough pressure to restart the acquisition conversation. He wasn't trying to destroy Iron Ridge, he was trying to buy it. And when buying it the normal way didn't work, he tried to frighten them into selling it. She stood up and walked to the door of the trailer. "Ray," she said. Ray was outside close enough that she suspected he'd been staying near on purpose. He looked up. "Get Victor," she said, "and Paul, now." The way she said it made him move without asking why. They were in the front office within 4 minutes. Paul had been in the back room going through additional documentation. Victor came in from the yard still carrying the work gloves he'd had on. Ray stood in the doorway. She turned her laptop around so they could see the screen. "Meridian Land Partners," she said, "the company that's been trying to buy this property for 18 months. The managing member is Derek Whitmore." The room was very quiet. She watched Victor process it, watched the pieces assemble behind his eyes. The unanswered letters, the escalating offers, the sudden appearance of a regulatory threat, the timing of all of it. She watched the moment he understood the full shape of what had been done. His expression did not change dramatically. Victor Kane's expressions never changed dramatically, but something in his stillness deepened into something colder and more absolute. "He's been trying to buy us out," Victor said. "Flat, final. For 18 months, she said. "And when you didn't respond to the offers, he pivoted to regulatory pressure. The compliance complaint was never the end goal. It was a tool to make the acquisition conversation happen on his terms instead of yours." Paul was already on his phone typing. "This is not just fraud," he said without looking up. "This is extortion. Using regulatory complaints as leverage to coerce a property sale, there's case law on this. It's not common, but it exists and it's prosecutable." "Can you prove the complaints were coordinated with the acquisition interest?" Ray said from the doorway. "The corporate structure does that for us," Paul said. "Whitmore is the beneficial owner of both the entity making acquisition offers and the entity filing or planning to file regulatory complaints against the same target. That is not a coincidence that any court is going to overlook." Victor set his gloves down on the desk. "He thought we were too disorganized to connect it," he said. "He thought the letters and the compliance action were in 2 different filing systems that nobody had ever cross-referenced," Madison said. "He was right 6 weeks ago. He's not right anymore." Victor looked at her for a long moment. "How long have you suspected this?" he said. "Since this morning," she said honestly, "when I realized he couldn't be here just for a pattern acquisition. The timing was too urgent. He was too rattled when the compliance documents were clean. A man doing a routine shakedown doesn't rattle that easily. He rattles when the specific objective he's been building toward for 18 months is suddenly at risk." "The land," Victor said. "The land," she confirmed. Paul looked up from his phone. "I need to make calls. Real ones, not preliminary. This is bigger than what I handle day to day, and I want to bring in someone with specific fraud prosecution experience. Do I have authorization?" He was looking at Victor. Victor looked at Madison. She understood what that look meant. Not passing the decision. Asking for her read, her assessment, her call on whether this was the right move, the right time, the right direction. She thought about it for exactly 5 seconds. "Yes," she said. "Make the calls." Paul walked out of the trailer with his phone already to his ear. Ray hadn't moved from the doorway. He was looking at Victor in the way he looked at Victor when something important had shifted, and he was waiting to understand what it meant. "The land is worth $12 million, Victor said quietly. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was the sound of a man calculating something. "At Whitmore's offered price," Madison said, "which was likely below market if he was planning to develop it." "Below market," Victor repeated. "Mixed-use development in this region. 43 acres with existing infrastructure and licensed operational status." She paused. "I haven't done a full appraisal analysis, but yes, likely below market." Victor sat down in the chair across from her desk. She had rarely seen him sit in that chair. He was a man who stood, who moved, who operated in the physical space of the yard. Sitting across from her desk gave him an air of having arrived somewhere he hadn't expected to end up. "We built this place from nothing," he said. 1987, I was 21 years old and I had a truck, a chain hoist, and a handshake deal with a farmer who owned the original parcel and wanted someone to clean up the wrecks on it. He looked at his hands. Every acre we added, we earned. Every license, every permit, every piece of equipment, we earned it. "I know," she said. "And some man in an expensive suit decided it was his," Victor said. "Yes," he looked at her. "Not today," he said. "No," she said, "not today." Ray made a sound from the doorway that was not quite a word, a low affirming sound, the kind that meant agreement at a level deeper than vocabulary. The rest of the morning moved fast. Paul came back in at 10:30 with the name of a fraud litigation attorney in Phoenix, a woman named Sandra Reeves who specialized in business extortion and had, according to Paul, a record against coordinated regulatory fraud that he described as formidable in the tone of a man who used that word carefully. She wanted to see the file. Madison sent it within the hour. Sandra Reeves called back at noon. Madison put her on speaker. The attorney's voice was direct and unhurried, which was exactly what you wanted from someone about to tell you how difficult something was going to be. "I've read the file," Sandra said. "Ms. Blake, how long did it take you to compile this?" "A year and a half," Madison said. "And you built it from what publicly available records?" "Mostly. Some documentation from former employees of the affected businesses who I contacted directly. One case where I had personal access to internal communications from before the dissolution." "Your own company," Sandra said. "Yes." A pause. "This is admissible, most of it. There are some pieces I'd want to verify independently, but the structural argument, the pattern, the timeline, the corporate connections is solid. Better than solid." "What does an inquiry look like from here?" Paul said. "It depends on how we approach it," Sandra said. "State AG can open an inquiry based on what's here. If they open it, Whitmore is likely to know within a week these things aren't confidential at the investigation stage, which means you need to be prepared for him to move fast if he has any remaining leverage." "He doesn't," Madison said. "His regulatory angle is closed. The compliance record is clean. The documentation gap is filled. He has nothing to file that we can't immediately answer." "What about personal pressure?" Sandra said. "Litigation against you individually. He knows you compiled this file. He may come after your credibility, your employment history, the dissolution of your former company." "Let him," Madison said. A pause on the other end of the line. "Ms. Blake," Sandra said, "I want you to understand what that means. If this goes forward, you will be deposed. Your history will be examined. The dissolution of Blake and Whitmore will be opened, and everything in it, including your role, your decisions, your professional conduct will be scrutinized." "I know," Madison said, "and you are willing to go through that." She thought about the parking lot in Columbus, the 47 resumes, the laundromat room in Pittsburgh, the drive across 3 states with a handwritten note and a near-empty tank. She thought about what she'd found when she got here. "I'm willing to go through that," she said. Victor across the desk was watching her. His expression was the one she still didn't have a complete name for, the one that had been developing in layers since the day she'd handed him the solution before she showed him the problem. He nodded. Once. She looked back at the phone. "Move forward," she said. "All right," Sandra said. "I'll need original documentation, not copies. Can you courier the core file to my Phoenix office?" "Today," Paul said. "I'll handle it." "One more thing," Sandra said. "Iron Ridge Salvage and its principals, Mr. Kane specifically, will likely be called as witnesses if this proceeds to litigation. Is that going to be a problem?" Paul looked at Victor. Victor said no. It was, she thought, possibly the most decisive single word she had ever heard spoken. "Then we're in motion," Sandra said. "I'll be in touch by end of day." The call ended. The trailer was quiet for a moment. Then Ray said from his position near the door where he had been standing for almost 2 hours, "We just went to war." "We were already at war," Madison said. "Now we're fighting back." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Okay, yeah." He went outside. Through the window, she could hear him a moment later saying something to the men in the yard. Not much, not the full story, just enough. She knew the way information moved through Iron Ridge by now. It moved in fragments and arrived complete. By the end of the day, everyone would know something significant had happened. By morning, they would understand the shape of it. Paul spent the next 2 hours organizing the documentation for the courier. Madison helped him not because he needed her help, but because she needed to do something with her hands. The physical act of organizing, separating, verifying she had learned over the weeks at Iron Ridge that it settled something in her that nothing else quite reached. At 2 p.m. something happened, a chairman that she hadn't anticipated. Her personal cell phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. Arizona area code. She answered it. "Miss Blake," a woman's voice, young, controlled. "This is Claire Shue. We met yesterday." Madison went very still. "I remember," she said carefully. "I'm calling on a personal basis," Claire said. "Not in any professional capacity. I want to be clear about that." "Okay," Madison said. A pause. "I've been working for Derek Whitmore for 14 months, Claire said. "The Iron Ridge matter is the fourth regulatory compliance action I've been involved in during that time." Madison closed her eyes for 2 seconds. "And the other three," she said, "proceeded in the way he intended them to," Claire said. I told myself it was standard competitive business practice, aggressive but legal, that the businesses involved had genuine compliance issues that were being addressed through the process. "But," Madison said, "but the other three didn't have someone like you," Claire said. "They didn't have documentation that disproved the complaint on the spot. And watching what happened yesterday, watching him try to use a document he knew was outdated," she stopped, restarted. "He knew it was outdated. He told me before we walked in that there was a chance the record had been updated, but that the psychological impact of presenting the complaint in person was worth the risk." Madison's hand tightened on the phone. "He knew," she said. "He knew," Claire said. "He was counting on the fact that even if you could disprove the specific document, the presence of an official-looking regulatory complaint in a room with his manner and his preparation would be enough to make someone hesitate, to make the offer of settlement feel like the easier path." Madison was silent for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. A long pause. "Because I'm an attorney," Claire said. "And what I watched him do yesterday, what I now understand I've been helping him do, that's not something I can keep calling standard practice." She paused. "I have documentation from my own files, correspondence between Whitmore and the regulatory officials who received the previous complaints, notes from strategy sessions, communications that show coordination between the compliance action filings and the acquisition offers." Madison sat down. "Claire," she said carefully, "do you understand what you're describing?" "Yes," Claire said. "I'm describing evidence of coordinated fraud, and I'm describing my own potential culpability as the attorney who prepared the documents." "Have you spoken to anyone else about this?" "No, you're the first call I've made." "You need independent legal counsel," Madison said immediately, "before you do anything else. Not Paul Garrett, he represents Iron Ridge, which creates a conflict. You need someone who represents you specifically." "I know," Claire said. "I'm working on that, but I needed to tell you first, before the legal machinery started, because what he did to your company." She paused. "I found out about Blake and Whitmore 2 months ago. He mentioned it to me. He described it as a necessary strategic decision. He seemed proud of it." Another pause. "That's when I started keeping my own records." Madison sat at her desk in a salvage yard in the desert and felt something move through her that she hadn't felt in a year and a half. Not vindication, something quieter and more complicated than vindication. The particular relief of knowing that the thing you knew was real had always been real, that you hadn't been wrong or paranoid or broken by it, that someone else had eventually seen it too. "Get the attorney first," she said. "Call me when you have counsel. I'll tell you who to reach out to." "Okay," Claire said. Then after a pause, "I'm sorry for what was done to your company, for my part in what almost happened here." Madison thought about what to say. "It's not done yet," she said, "and you can still choose what side of it you end up on." A long pause. "I know," Claire said. They hung up. Madison sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she picked it up again and called Paul. He answered on the second ring. "Derek's attorney is going to come forward," she said. "Claire Shue, she has internal documentation, correspondence, strategy notes, Communications showing coordination between the regulatory filings and the acquisition offers. The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 3 seconds. Madison, Paul said. I know, she said. That's not a file anymore, he said. That's a case. I know, she said again. She hung up and sat at her desk and looked at the 4 binders she'd built in 48 hours of work, at the compliance calendar on the wall, at the old broom she'd leaned in the corner of the front office after her first day she'd kept it there, because she hadn't found another place for it, and then at some point it had stopped being something without a place and had started being something she chose to keep. She wasn't superstitious. She wasn't a person who attached meaning to objects. But every time she looked at that broom, she thought about the morning Victor had handed it to her, and she had understood exactly what it meant. Sweep without being asked, do the low work first, earn the right to the complicated work later. She had swept. She had done all the low work, and now the complicated work was in motion. She called her sister at 3:30 in the afternoon. Her sister answered immediately, which meant she'd been waiting again. It got bigger, Madison said. Her sister was quiet. How much bigger, she said. His attorney is going to turn on him, Madison said. She has internal documentation, and we have the corporate filing connecting him to the land acquisition entity. And Paul has a fraud litigation attorney in Phoenix who says the file is solid. She paused. It's a case, a real one. Her sister was quiet for so long that Madison checked her phone to see if the call had dropped. Madison, her sister finally said, did you know when you drove out there, did you know this is where it would end up? Madison thought about that honestly. No, she said. I drove out here because it was the only door that was open. I stayed because I found something worth staying for. And then he came and everything I'd been carrying for a year and a half suddenly had somewhere to go. Her sister exhaled. Mom's going to lose her mind, she said. Madison laughed, an actual real laugh that surprised her. Don't tell her yet, she said. Wait until there's something definitive. You know I can't keep this from her. Try, Madison said. Give me a week. I'll give you 3 days. That's the best I can do. I'll take it, she said. She hung up and went back to work. At 5 p.m., Sandra Reeves called back. I've reviewed the additional materials Paul sent over, she said. The Meridian Land Partners connection is exactly as strong as you thought. I've already drafted a preliminary inquiry request to the state AG. I want to file it in the morning, which means I need verified copies of the corporate filings tonight. You'll have them, Madison said. One more thing, Sandra said. I did some background research on Whitmore this afternoon. He's done this in 4 states over 10 years. The businesses he's targeted have a very specific profile established operations with land value, some compliance vulnerabilities, limited legal resources, and she paused. And typically a leadership structure that regulatory authorities are inclined to view with pre-existing skepticism. The implication landed. He targets businesses that people in authority might not instinctively want to protect, Madison said. Salvage yards, independent trucking companies, small manufacturers, operations that don't look like sympathetic victims, Madison said. Yes, Sandra said, it's strategic. He chooses targets where the regulatory complaint has surface plausibility because of the industry profile. Madison looked at the yard through the window, at the men working, at the mountains of salvaged metal, at the business that Victor Kane had built for 35 years from nothing, that had caught people who had nowhere else to go, that had run every day through heat and cold, and bureaucracy, and suspicion with a loyalty and a consistency that the paperwork had failed to capture until 6 weeks ago. That makes the pattern stronger, not weaker, she said. It shows deliberate selection of vulnerable targets. That's not aggressive business practice. That's predatory. Exactly what I'll be arguing, Sandra said. She hung up. Victor came in at 5:30. He stood in the doorway of the trailer and looked at her at the organized desk, the binders, the compliance calendar, the old broom in the corner. How are you, he said, not professionally, not as a manager checking on an employee, as a person asking another person. She thought about the honest answer. Tired, she said, and ready, both at the same time. He nodded. That's the right feeling for this. Victor, she said, I need you to know something about why he really came. The land, Victor said. I've been thinking about it all day. He's been trying to buy this property through Meridian Land Partners for 18 months, she said. The regulatory complaint was leverage for the acquisition. He wanted to make you afraid enough to sell. Victor was quiet. 43 acres, he said. Yes. He wanted our land, Victor said slowly. He didn't care about the business. He didn't care about the operations or the crew, no, she said. He wanted the land under it. Something crossed Victor's face that she had not seen before. Not anger, she'd seen that in his controlled still form. Not calculation, she'd seen that too. This was something older. Something that went back further than Derek Whitmore and regulatory complaints and fraudulent documents. This was the particular pain of a man who has built something real being told that someone looked at it and saw only the ground it stood on. He didn't see any of it, Victor said quietly. The work, the people, what we built. No, she said. He just saw real estate. Yes. He was quiet for a long moment. My father died on this property, he said. Not literally, but he worked here with me the first 6 years, before his heart gave out. He's buried 20 miles from here, and he used to say he could see the yard from wherever he was going. She didn't say anything. Nobody's taking this land, Victor said. Nobody's taking this land, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Sandra Reeves, he said. Paul says she's good. She's better than good, Madison said. Then we let her work, he said. And we keep this yard running, every day same as always because that's what we do. He paused. And when Derek Whitmore figures out that it's over, he stopped. She waited. I want to be standing right here when he does, Victor said. She looked at the man who had handed her a broom on her first morning and told her she wouldn't last a week, who had signed a document without reading it because he'd decided she was worth trusting, who had stood behind her in a room full of pressure and said simply, finally, completely, he's going to have to go through all of us to get to you. You will be, she said. He nodded once, then he went back to his yard, and she went back to work. Because Derek Whitmore was not done, and neither were they. And the work was the thing that held everything together, the work and the people doing it, and the particular stubborn refusal to let something real be dismantled by someone who had never built a single real thing in his life. Outside, the bell rang for the end of the day. Inside, Madison Blake kept typing. Sandra Reeves filed the inquiry with the State Attorney General's office at 9:17 on a Thursday morning. One text, no punctuation, filed 9:17, AG Southwest Division, confirmation number to follow. Madison read it at her desk, set the phone down, and sat very still. That was the ignition. Everything before the file she'd carried for 14 months, the 4 binders Claire's called the Meridian Land Partners connection, all of it had been fuel. This was the match. Paul came in at 9:30, read her face, and said, she filed. 9:17, Madison said. He sat down and exhaled. Now we wait. But waiting at Iron Ridge wasn't the same as waiting anywhere else. The bell rang at noon. The machinery ran. The men worked. Victor moved through the yard the way he always moved, with the unhurried authority of someone who had built the ground he was standing on and knew every inch of it. She went back to work. There were always still documents to organize. She had learned in the months here that protecting something was never finished. It was daily cumulative, a layer added every morning before the threats arrived. Ray knocked on the open door at 11. Victor wants everyone in the bay at noon, including you. What for? She said. A lunch, he said, and left before she could push further. She arrived at the bay to find the folding tables arranged differently, not along the wall in parallel rows, but in a large square in the center, everyone facing everyone. More food than usual. Someone had made an effort. She took the seat Ray indicated, not the edge of the table nearest the door where she'd sat on her first day. The middle, between Dutch and Terrence, who had started greeting her by name 3 weeks ago. Victor stood at the head of the square. He didn't make speeches. She knew that about him. Most of you know what's happening, he said. The legal process is moving. It'll take time, might get messy. That's fine. He looked around the table at every face. What I want to say is this. 6 weeks ago, this place had problems that could have taken it down. Not because anyone here did anything wrong, because the paperwork that proved we did things right didn't exist the way it needed to. He paused. It exists now. The bay was quiet. And the person who made that happen. He looked at Madison, not with fanfare, just directly. She drove in here with a handwritten note, and I told her she wouldn't last a week. A couple of men laughed, low and genuine. I was wrong, Victor said, simply, without apology, but without deflection either. Just the plain correction of a man who fixed his mistakes because accuracy required it. Whatever comes next, she's the reason we're standing here able to fight it. He sat down. That was the speech. It was the right length. Dutch put a plate in front of her without being asked, piled high the way people feed you when they want to show something they don't have words for. She looked down at the plate. She thought about the first lunch she'd eaten here. The paper bag, the peanut butter, the 17 men who hadn't spoken to her and hadn't been rude about it, who had simply not yet known if she was real. She was real now. She picked up her fork and let herself, for the length of one meal, simply be in it without analyzing it or protecting herself from wanting it too much. She just sat there and let it be real. Derek Whitmore called at 2:48 that afternoon. She let it ring twice, then she answered. You filed an inquiry with the AG, he said. His voice was controlled, but she heard what lived underneath, not panic yet, but the tautness of someone discovering the game board had changed without his permission. Sandra Reeves filed, she said. She's the attorney. You built a case out of what, a year and a half of corporate filings, she said. Meridian Land Partners, WEM Capital Holdings, 4 prior businesses in 4 states. Your own emails. Claire had notes from your strategy sessions. Silence, long silence. He didn't deny Claire. She'd expected him to. Claire, he said, just the name. Flat. She retained independent counsel yesterday, Madison said. She's cooperating fully. Another silence. Madison. His voice had changed entirely now. The professional frame gone. Underneath it was something almost stripped bare. You should have stayed in Columbus. I ran out of options in Columbus, she said. I could have. No, she said. You couldn't. And this isn't something we negotiate over the phone. I'm not trying to negotiate, he said. Then what are you trying to do? A long pause. I don't know, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her in 8 years. She sat with that for exactly 1 moment. Get an attorney, Derek, she said, a real one, and listen to what they tell you. She hung up. Her hands were shaking slightly. She pressed them flat on the desk until they stopped. Ray was in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. He called, she said. Ray's jaw tightened. And he knows it's over, she said. He just doesn't know that he knows it yet. The next weeks moved the way legal proceedings always move fast in bursts, slow in stretches. Sandra submitted the full evidentiary package on day 4. Claire's documentary evidence arrived on day 6 and changed the weight of everything. She had kept strategy, session notes, internal emails, and a memo Derek had written to himself, the kind people write to document their own reasoning, the habit that destroyed people consistently and never seemed to stop anyone from doing it. Sandra sent Madison the memo with 1 line of annotation. He wrote it down. She read it at her desk, walked outside, stood in the yard because she needed the noise and the physical reality of it when she processed what she was holding. Victor found her there. He wrote it down, she said. Victor was still for a moment. Fool, he said quietly. Not with satisfaction. Just the plain assessment of a man who had survived long enough to know that the most dangerous thing anyone could do was underestimate the people they were trying to destroy. The twist came on day 16. Sandra called at 7:45 a.m. early for her. First signal, something had shifted. He contacted my office last night, she said. Through his attorney, he wants to negotiate. He's retained Gerald Marsh. Madison put down her coffee. White-collar defense. Chicago. Very expensive. And very good, Sandra said, which means he thinks he has something to lose. Marsh indicated Whitmore has information relevant to the original dissolution of Blake and Whitmore. Information he's willing to disclose as part of a comprehensive settlement. Madison went very still. She already knew what it was. She had suspected it for 14 months and never been able to prove it. The gap in the sequence that had always felt deliberate. The client redirections, she said slowly, whether he started moving clients before or after the company began to fail, whether he caused the failure or just capitalized on it. If he caused it, Sandra said quietly, that's not breach of fiduciary duty. That's fraud, against you specifically. Madison sat with that. 14 months, the apartment, the resumes, the truck, the laundromat room in Pittsburgh, All of it not bad luck, not her failures, not the market turning wrong, deliberate. Engage with Marsh, she said. Find out what he's offering. All of it. The negotiation call came 2 days later. Victor sat across from her desk without being asked. He hadn't asked to be there, and she hadn't asked him to come. He simply arrived, sat down, and she had understood that he was going to be there the way he'd been there, in every room that had mattered since she walked through the gates. Marsh was precise and efficient. He confirmed what Sandra had suspected within the first 20 minutes. Derek Whitmore had, beginning in the 3rd year of their partnership, systematically redirected client relationships through a parallel entity. He had timed the dissolution to follow a period of artificially induced financial stress, delayed vendor payments, underreported receivables, strategic failure to renew 2 anchor contracts, creating the appearance of a business that had failed organically. It had not failed organically. It had been taken apart from the inside. When Marsh finished laying it out, Sandra looked at Madison. Madison looked at the desk in front of her. "We need the declaration first," she said, "in writing, signed, notarized, before any settlement terms are finalized." Marsh paused. "That's an unusual sequencing request." "It's my request," she said. "He spent 8 years lying to my face. I'm not negotiating on the basis of what he's offering to tell me. I'm negotiating on the basis of what he actually tells me." Victor across the desk said nothing, but she saw him nod once, almost imperceptibly. Marsh put the call on hold. 7 minutes. When he came back, "Mr. Whitmore will provide the declaration prior to finalization of settlement terms. 24 hours. 24 hours, Sandra confirmed. The declaration arrived the next day at 4 p.m. Madison read every page at her desk, every paragraph of precise formal language describing what Derek Whitmore had done to her company, her career, 8 years of her life. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at the old broom in the corner. She called Sandra. "It's complete," she said. "It's complete," Sandra said. "Valid, notarized, admissible. Madison, this is everything." "Then let's talk settlement terms," she said. The settlement took 11 days to finalize. Meridian Land Partners withdrew all acquisition interest in the Iron Ridge property with a 10-year non-approach covenant filed against the title. Derek's regulatory consulting practice was placed under AG oversight for 3 years. Civil restitution to the 3 prior businesses totaled a figure their attorneys called significant. Claire Shue received prosecutorial immunity in exchange for full cooperation. And Derek Whitmore entered a plea that included restitution oversight and a permanent ban from regulatory consulting in the state. For Madison, for the 8 years and the $4 million, and the parking lots, and the 47 resumes, and the truck with the cracked mirror, Sandra told her the civil restitution figure on a Tuesday morning. Madison pressed her hands flat on the desk and breathed. "It's not everything you lost," Sandra said. "It never is, but it's real, and it's yours." "I know," Madison said. She found Victor in the yard afterward. He read her face before she said a word. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He nodded once, went back to what he'd been doing. No ceremony, no fanfare. The work was still there. The work didn't pause for milestones. She went back inside and kept going. Victor offered her the operations director position on a Friday afternoon. "The company needs what you've been building," he said. "Not just the records, the systems, the compliance infrastructure. The way you see the whole operation, where it's vulnerable, where it's strong. That's not records management. That's operations." She looked at him. "The salary reflects the title," he said. "It's not a negotiation." She thought about Columbus, about the woman she'd been before this place, about the version of herself that had been good at her job and trusted the wrong person and watched everything fall and had taken 14 months to find the road back. She had not found the road back to what she'd had before. She'd found the road to something better. "Yes," she said. Ray came in at the end of that day. She could tell from his face that word had already moved through the yard. "Operations director," he said, grinning. Genuinely. The rare open kind. "Don't make it weird," she said. "It's not weird," he said. "It's right." He paused. "I called my mother." She looked up. "You called your mother?" "She likes stories about people who don't give up," he said. "She'll be very pleased." She shook her head. "Ray?" "What?" "Thank you," she said. "For the coffee, first week. before I'd done anything to deserve it. He shrugged. You were making a map of something everybody else called a disaster, he said. That seemed like the kind of thing that deserved coffee. He left. She stayed at her desk until the light changed and the yard went quiet. She listened to the last machinery shutting down, the sounds of men finishing and going home. Her phone buzzed. Her sister. Mom found out. She's crying, the good kind. Call her when you can. She looked around the office, the organized desk, the 4 binders, the compliance calendar, the old broom in the corner that she had never moved and never would. She thought about the sequence of everything that had brought her here, not as suffering to recount, just as the path that it had been. The marriage that ended, the betrayal she didn't see coming, the parking lots, the resumes, the truck, the handwritten note from a stranger in a diner, the gate nobody else would walk through, the back room full of 35 years of forgotten truth, the broom, the coffee, the EPA report in the wrong box, the declaration, the settlement, the bell at noon. She had thought for a long time that what had happened to her was the story. She understood now that it had only been the beginning of one. Months later, when a reporter asked Victor what had changed at Iron Ridge, he said, "Everyone who came here wanted to fix us. Madison was the first person who actually understood us." The reporter asked Madison about it afterward. She thought about it for a moment. "He's wrong," she said. The reporter looked up. "He did the same thing for me," she said. "He just doesn't know it yet." She kept the broom. It stood in the corner of the operations director's office, her office in a salvage yard that everyone said was impossible to build anything in, as the reminder of everything she had learned when she walked through the gate nobody else would walk through. That the place everyone warns you to avoid is sometimes exactly where you find yourself. That the people everyone misunderstands are sometimes the ones who stand behind you when everything else falls away. And that a woman who has lost everything, who drives through a desert with a handwritten note and an almost empty tank and nothing left to lose, is not a woman who has nothing. She is a woman who is finally free to find out what she's made of. Madison Blake found out, and the answer was the kind that doesn't change, doesn't bend, and doesn't break. No matter who comes through the gate thinking they can take what she's built. Not today, not ever.